The Stargate activation alarm blared through Cheyenne Mountain's gate room at 0247 hours, unscheduled, no IDC transmission, no MALP reconnaissance. Chevron after chevron locked into place with mechanical precision, each encoded symbol lighting up the control room's displays while Major Samantha Carter's fingers flew across her console. 7 points of origin shouldn't be possible without a DHD on the other side. Someone, something, was dialing in. Iris closed, Carter confirmed, watching the unstable vortex explode outward in its usual violent whoosh before settling into the shimmering event horizon pressed against titanium barrier. No radio contact, no GDO signal. Whatever's trying to come through doesn't have our codes. Colonel Jack O'Neill descended the stairs into the gate room with his characteristic unhurried stride, P90 already in hand. Behind him, Teal'c moved with Jaffa precision, staff weapon armed and ready. Daniel Jackson hurried after them, adjusting his glasses and carrying a translation tablet instead of a weapon, optimistic as always that this might be a communication error rather than a threat. So, O'Neill said, positioning himself behind the reinforced barriers set up for exactly this scenario, do we think this is a, take me to your leader, situation or more of a prepare to be destroyed vibe? The wormhole rippled. Something struck the iris from the other side. Not the usual splatter of matter destroyed at the molecular level, but a heavy impact that resonated through the gate room like a drum. Then another. Something was trying to force its way through solid titanium, and the iris was holding, but the force behind each blow suggested something with considerable strength and absolutely no understanding of physics. Energy spike on the other side, Carter reported, her voice tight with concern. Whatever it is, it's not giving up. Then the pattern changed. Instead of impacts, the sensors registered two distinct objects attempting rematerialization simultaneously. The Iris protocol should have destroyed both instantly, matter meeting barrier at the molecular level meant annihilation. Should have. The first form came through wrong. It bypassed the iris not by force but by existing in a space that shouldn't have been possible, sliding through quantum probability in a way that made Carter's instruments scream contradictions. The creature that materialized in the gate room was something from a world where evolution had taken a nightmare path, 8 feet of chitinous black carapace, too many joints in limbs that ended in blade-length talons, and a head that was mostly jaw. It screamed, a sound that human throats couldn't produce, and the gate room's temperature dropped 15 degrees in an instant. The second form came through properly, stumbling through the event horizon a heartbeat after the creature, and O'Neill's finger moved to his trigger before his brain fully processed what he was seeing. A man, at least humanoid. White hair pulled back, 2 swords crossed on his back, wearing leather armor that looked like it belonged in a medieval fair rather than a gate room. His eyes were the color of amber or old gold, with vertical pupils that caught the light wrong, and his face had the hard lines of someone who'd seen too much and expected worse. The white-haired man took in the situation with a single sweeping glance. The creature already moving toward the nearest SF, the armed soldiers, the massive ring behind him, the walls of a military installation. His hand moved to one of his swords with trained precision, but he didn't draw. Instead, his left hand came up in a gesture that looked almost casual, fingers twisting in a pattern that made the air itself remember how to push. The sign, ARD, though no one in the room knew to call it that, caught the creature mid-leap and hammered it sideways into the gate room wall with concussive force. The impact cracked concrete. The creature shrieked again, already recovering, already turning toward this new threat with predatory focus. Hold your fire. O'Neill commanded, because his people had excellent trigger discipline, but this was rapidly becoming a situation where friendly fire was a real possibility. The SFs maintained their positions, weapons trained on both the creature and the stranger, ready for either threat. The white-haired man drew the sword from his back in a movement too fast to properly follow, not the decorative one with the elaborate crossguard, but the other one, the blade that seemed to drink in light and reflect it back as cold silver. He moved forward with the creature, not away from it, closing distance with something that had half a foot of height and probably twice his mass. His footwork was precise, economical, the movement of someone who'd been trained to kill since childhood and had spent decades perfecting the art. The creature lunged, talons spreading wide enough to disembowel a man. The stranger pivoted inside its reach, sword moving in an upward arc that found the gap where carapace met softer tissue beneath the jaw. Silver bit deep, black ichor spraying across ancient stone floor, and the creature's shriek became a gurgle as it collapsed forward. The stranger was already moving, sword coming around for a second strike that separated the head from the body with brutal efficiency. The gate room fell silent except for the dying hum of the event horizon as the wormhole collapsed behind them. 30 weapons remained trained on the white-haired man as he straightened from his kill, flicking black blood from silver steel with practiced motion before sheathing the blade. He reached up slowly, keeping his hands visible, showing he understood the threat of the automatic weapons pointed at his center mass, and pulled something from around his neck. A medallion of some kind, shaped like a snarling wolf's head. It had been vibrating violently during the fight, now it settled into stillness against his chest. "Lower your weapons," O'Neill said, because the stranger had just killed something that would have torn through his people like tissue paper, and had done it in under 10 seconds with a sword. That deserved at least a conversation before they started shooting. Slowly. The stranger's golden eyes swept across the gate room again, taking in details, cataloging threats and exits with professional assessment. When he spoke, his voice was rough, accented in a way that didn't match any European language in the SGC's database, with an undercurrent of wariness that suggested he expected violence despite the lowered weapons. "That was a kikimora," he said, nodding toward the corpse. "Water spirit, usually. This one had been corrupted by something, portal magic, dimensional bleed. I was tracking it through the continent when it found," he gestured at the Stargate, searching for words. "That. The portal. Went through before I could stop it." "Portal," Daniel repeated, already moving forward with the kind of academic enthusiasm that made O'Neill want to preemptively say, "No, you mean the Stargate? You followed it through without knowing where it led?" The stranger's expression suggested this was obvious. "It's a kikimora. They hunt in packs. If it was corrupted and made it to a populated area, it would kill dozens before someone competent could respond. That's..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "That's the contract. That's the work." "The work," O'Neill repeated. "And you are?" "Geralt," the stranger said. "Of Rivia. I'm a witcher." Teal'c's staff weapon hadn't moved. "What manner of being is a witcher?" Geralt's lips twitched in something that might have been bitter amusement. "A mutant. A monster hunter. Someone parents threaten their children with when they misbehave." His golden eyes fixed on O'Neill with uncomfortable intensity. "Someone who kills things that need killing, and tries not to ask too many questions about the politics behind the contract." Carter was already scanning him with a handheld device, medical and energy readings scrolling across the display. "Colonel, his physiology is reading as human but with significant deviations. Enhanced muscle density, modified cardiovascular system, unusual neurological patterns. It's like someone took a human baseline and systematically upgraded every system for combat efficiency." "Witcher mutations," Geralt confirmed. "Trials of the grasses. Herbs, alchemy, magic. Most children don't survive the process. Those who do," he gestured at himself. "We hunt monsters. It's what we're made for." O'Neill studied the man, the witcher, and the very dead creature on his gate room floor. Behind Geralt, the Stargate stood silent, inactive, offering no explanations for how a medieval monster hunter with a magic sword and apparently supernatural abilities had just appeared from somewhere that wasn't in their database. But the creature was real, its black blood staining the concrete, and Geralt had killed it with the kind of professional competence O'Neill recognized from a lifetime in special forces. "Well, Geralt of Rivia," O'Neill said, slinging his P90 over his shoulder but keeping it ready, "welcome to Earth. Specifically, welcome to the Stargate Command Complex, Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado. And we have a lot of questions, starting with what planet you came from and whether we should expect more of those. What did you call them? Kikimoras, Geralt repeated. He was looking at the Stargate again, at the complex machinery and the chevrons and the DHD that wasn't actually a DHD but served the same function. And I came from a place called the continent. Though I'm guessing, his medallion twitched against his chest. That's farther away than you usually travel with your portal. Our Stargate, Daniel corrected, moving closer to examine the dead creature with scholarly fascination that made Geralt tense slightly. It connects to other planets through stable wormholes. Thousands of worlds, all across the galaxy. We've never encountered anything called the continent in any ancient database. Ancient? Geralt's attention sharpened. You mean the people who built the portal? The Stargate, yes. The ancients created the gate system millions of years ago, before they ascended to a higher plane of existence. Daniel was already pulling up star maps on his tablet. If you came through our gate, you had to dial from another gate somewhere in the network. Can you describe where you were? Any landmarks, constellations, technological level of the civilization? Geralt's expression suggested he was rapidly recalculating everything he'd assumed about the universe. There was a structure, he said slowly. Elven. Old magic, old stone. The kikimora was drawn to it. Corrupted creatures seek power sources. I followed, and it activated something. A ring of stone with symbols, like yours, but, he shook his head. Different. Older, maybe. The portal opened, the kikimora went through, I followed. An unknown gate, Carter said, exchanging glances with O'Neill. Colonel, if there's a gate out there that's not in our database, one that connects to somewhere called the continent, that's significant. It could be a previously undiscovered ancient outpost, or it could be a really bad idea to worry about right now, O'Neill interrupted, because his priority list included, secure the armed stranger with weird eyes, clean up the monster corpse, and, figure out if anything else is coming through, before, mount an expedition to Fantasyland. He turned back to Geralt. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with us, answer some questions, let our doctor make sure you're not carrying any alien parasites or diseases, and explain exactly what you are and what you can do. You cooperate, we don't have a problem. You don't, he gestured at the SFs still maintaining perimeter. We have a problem. Geralt's hand hadn't moved toward his sword, but his posture radiated the calm readiness of someone who could draw and kill in the time it took to blink. And after your questions? After? O'Neill considered. That depends on your answers. But if you really are what you say, a professional monster hunter, I'm guessing we might be able to find some work for you. He nodded at the kikimora corpse. Turns out the galaxy's full of monsters. Some of them wear human faces. Some of them claim to be gods. And some of them, he smiled without humor, need someone who knows how to kill things that shouldn't exist. Geralt studied O'Neill for a long moment, those inhuman eyes seeming to weigh and measure everything about the man in front of him. Then, slowly, he nodded. I'll answer your questions. But I work on contract. Professional rates. And I choose which monsters I hunt. We can discuss terms, O'Neill said. Because he'd learned a long time ago that the galaxy didn't care about what should or shouldn't be possible, and sometimes the right person for an impossible job was a white-haired mutant with a magic sword who'd literally fallen through a hole in space chasing a nightmare. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Indeed. Behind them, the Stargate remained silent, inactive, keeping its secrets about where exactly Geralt of Rivia had come from and what else might be waiting on the other side. But in Cheyenne Mountain's medical bay, preparations were already underway for a very unusual examination. And in the briefing room, General Hammond was reviewing the security footage with growing concern, watching a man kill a monster with medieval weapons in a facility designed to defend against alien threats with advanced technology. The Witcher had come through the gate. The question was whether Earth was ready for what a Witcher could teach them about monsters, and what they might teach him about the kind of threats that existed among the stars. The medical bay's examination table was standard military issue, cold steel, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Geralt sat on it with the patience of someone accustomed to being studied like a curiosity, his leather armor removed and folded neatly beside him, leaving him in a shirt that had seen better days and trousers that wouldn't have looked out of place in a Renaissance fair. Dar. Janet Fraser circled him with clinical precision, running scanners that beeped and hummed with readings that made her frown at the display. Heart rate is elevated but steady at 90 beats per minute, she noted, speaking partly to her medical recorder and partly to Carter, who stood nearby with her own set of instruments. That would be concerning in a normal human, but given his physiology, Colonel O'Neill mentioned enhanced mutations. Witcher mutations, Geralt corrected, watching the scanner with wary interest. 2 hearts would be more efficient, but we make do with one that works harder. Blood moves faster, carries more oxygen. Useful when you're fighting something that can tear through steel. Fraser's eyebrows rose. You're serious. I rarely joke, Geralt said flatly. Witchers don't have much sense of humor. Side effect of the mutations, or maybe just the work. O'Neill leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the examination with the air of someone trying to decide if this was the strangest thing he'd encountered this week. Given his career with the SGC, that was a high bar. So these mutations. Someone did this to you on purpose. The mages of Kaer Morhen, Geralt confirmed. Witcher training begins in childhood. Swordsmanship, monster lore, tracking, alchemy. Then the trials, alchemical mutagens, magical infusions, herbal compounds that rewrite your biology from the inside out. Most candidates die. 70%, maybe more. Those who survive, he held up his hand, showing the faint silvery scars visible along his forearms. We become something else. Faster, stronger, harder to kill. Enhanced senses. Extended lifespan, I'm nearly a century old. Daniel, who'd been examining Geralt's swords with academic fascination, looked up sharply. A century? You're 100 years old. Give or take a decade. Geralt's expression suggested this wasn't particularly remarkable. Witchers age slowly. Side effect of the mutations. We live longer, heal faster, and die harder than normal humans. Makes the work more sustainable. You need decades of experience to know how to kill a fiend or prepare for a contracts against a higher vampire. Higher vampire? Daniel repeated, setting down the silver sword with newfound respect. As in, there are lower vampires. 3 classifications, Geralt said, warming slightly to the academic discussion. Lower vampires are mindless predators, Garkins, Fletters, Alps. Dangerous but relatively simple to kill with the right preparation. Higher vampires are intelligent, powerful, nearly immortal. You can't kill them unless another higher vampire does it. Best you can do is make them decide you're not worth the trouble. Carter's scanner beeped insistently. Colonel, his cellular structure shows signs of extensive genetic modification. Not just enhancement, this is systematic restructuring at the molecular level. Whoever performed these mutations understood genetic engineering at a level that rivals ancient technology. Magic, Geralt corrected. The mages who created the Witcher mutations didn't think of it as genetics. They thought of it as transformation, alchemy, binding power to flesh. But, he studied Carter's equipment with growing interest. Maybe you're right. Maybe magic and your science are describing the same thing from different angles. Teal'c, who'd remained silent until now, stepped forward. His dark eyes studied Geralt with the assessment of one warrior evaluating another. You were created as weapons. As soldiers designed to hunt specific prey. Yes, Geralt said simply. There was no defensiveness in his tone, just statement of fact. Witchers were made to kill monsters that normal humans couldn't handle. We're tools. Useful tools, most of the time. Feared tools, all the time. People need us, but they don't want us around once the contract's done. The Jaffa were also created to serve a purpose, Teal'c said quietly. We bore gold larvae in our bodies, sustained them, served the system lords who claimed to be gods. We were slaves who believed our slavery was divine purpose. His expression held something that might have been respect. You were given no choice in your creation. Yet you chose what to do with what you became. Geralt's golden eyes met Teal'c's, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of shared experience. The trials killed most of my friends, he said. The ones who survived learned quickly that destiny and purpose are words people use when they want to control you. I hunt monsters because I'm good at it and because someone has to. Not because I was made to. Fraser's scanner chimed with a new reading. Dr. Jackson, you're going to want to see this. His blood, Major Carter, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Carter moved closer, her own instruments focusing on the blood sample Fraser had drawn. Metallic compounds. Trace elements of silver, sulfur, complex organic molecules that don't match anything in our database. It's like his blood is a delivery system for alchemical compounds. Witcher potions, Geralt explained. We brew them from monster parts, herbs, alcohol. They enhance our abilities temporarily, speed, strength, night vision, resistance to toxins. But they're toxic themselves. Normal humans who drink Witcher potions die in agony. Our mutations let us metabolize the compounds without dying. Usually. O'Neill's tone suggested this was exactly the kind of qualified statement that concerned him. Geralt shrugged. Every potion has side effects. Black blood makes your blood poisonous, useful when fighting vampires, since they tend to bite. Blizzard accelerates your reflexes but puts massive strain on your heart. Cat lets you see in absolute darkness but turns your eyes solid black. You learn to balance effectiveness against toxicity. Overdose, and even a Witcher's metabolism fails. Daniel had moved to examining the medallion Geralt had placed beside his armor. This vibrated during the fight. And you said it reacts to magic? Witcher medallion, Geralt confirmed. Shaped like the symbol of whatever school trained you, mine's the Wolf School, Kaer Morhen. It vibrates in the presence of magic, dimensional instability, active enchantments. Saved my life more times than I can count, magical traps, illusions, cursed objects. It warned me when the kikimora found the portal structure. And it's been vibrating constantly since you arrived here, Daniel observed, watching the medallion twitch against the metal tray. Geralt's expression tightened. Yes. Faintly, but constantly. Like there's active magic everywhere in this facility. In the walls, the equipment, that portal of yours. This place, he gestured at the medical bay, at Cheyenne Mountain beyond. It exists in a space where magic or technology or whatever you call it is woven into everything. My medallion hasn't stopped reacting since I came through. Carter and Daniel exchanged significant looks. The Stargate, Carter said. It's powered by Nequata-based energy systems, ancient technology that manipulates space-time and energy at quantum levels. If your medallion is sensitive to what you call magic, it would absolutely react to that. The entire SGC runs on adapted alien technology. Which means, O'Neill said, pushing off from the doorframe and moving into the room properly, we need to talk about exactly what you can do, how these mutations of yours work, and whether you're going to set off every alarm we have every time you walk past an Nequata reactor. Geralt met his gaze steadily. I can show you better than I can explain. But I'll need space, somewhere your people won't panic if things get loud. Fraser had finished her examination, stepping back with the air of a doctor who'd seen her share of impossible but was still recalibrating her understanding of human biology. Medically, he's clear. No parasites, no diseases we can detect. His physiology is wildly abnormal by human standards but appears stable. I'd like to run more comprehensive tests, but, she looked at Geralt with professional concern. I'm guessing you've heard that request before. From every court mage, druid, and physician I've ever met, Geralt confirmed. I make a fascinating specimen. The answer is the same as always, run your tests if they help you understand the threat assessment, but I'm not a research subject. I'm a professional, and I have work to do. The kikimora, O'Neill said. You mentioned they hunt in packs. Geralt's expression grew grim. Yes. Where there's one, there are usually more. They nest near water, usually in groups of 3 to 5. The one that came through had been corrupted, exposed to something that made it more aggressive, more dangerous. If others followed it to the portal structure, if they found a way through. Then we have a problem, O'Neill finished. He glanced at Carter and Daniel. Get a UAV ready for reconnaissance. If there are more of those things on the other side of wherever Geralt came from, I want to know about it before they decide to visit. There's another issue, Geralt said, standing from the examination table and retrieving his armor. The portal I came through, your Stargate, but older, different. I don't know if it's still active, if it closed behind me, or if those coordinates even exist in your system. I can describe the location, but I don't know how to translate that into anything useful for your technology. Daniel was already pulling up star charts on his tablet. Describe it anyway. Architectural style, astronomical markers, anything distinctive about the region. The ancient seated gates across multiple galaxies. If there's an unknown gate out there, one that connects to a world we've never catalogued. It means someone built a gate we don't know about, Carter finished, or there's a gap in our database large enough to hide an entire civilization. Geralt pulled his armor back on with practiced efficiency, buckling straps and checking movement with the automatic precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. The structure was elven. Built before humans came to the continent, during the age when elder races ruled. All sharp angles and flowing curves, white stone that never weathered, covered in vines and magic that made the air taste like copper and ozone. Sounds ancient, Daniel said, excitement creeping into his voice. The architectural style, the preserved materials, the integration of advanced technology into the environment. Geralt, the people who built that structure might be the same race who created the Stargate network. The ancients were the first evolution, they reached a level of advancement millions of years ago that we're still trying to understand. First evolution, Geralt repeated, testing the phrase. The elves on the continent arrived through a conjunction of spheres, dimensions colliding, worlds briefly overlapping. They built their cities, ruled for millennia, then faded when humans arrived. He paused, frowning. If your ancients built the structure the elves claimed as their own, that would mean the elves found something far older than their civilization. Something they didn't understand but learned to use. That fits the pattern, Carter said. We've encountered dozens of civilizations that discovered ancient technology and incorporated it into their own cultures without understanding the underlying science. The Goa'uld built an empire on stolen ancient and Asgard technology. The Teal'c developed their own advances but started from an ancient foundation. O'Neill held up a hand before the scientists could spiral into theoretical territory. Fascinating as this is, we have immediate problems. 1. He pointed at the medical bay's exit, where armed SFs still waited. You're an unknown quantity who killed something in our gate room with a sword and weird hand gestures. 2. There might be more of those things out there. 3. You're claiming to be from somewhere that's not in our database, which is either really interesting or really concerning. So here's what happens next. He stepped closer to Geralt, meeting those inhuman eyes with the flat command presence that had carried him through decades of special operations. You come to the briefing room. You tell General Hammond everything, where you came from, what you are, what you can do. You answer our questions honestly. Then we decide if you're a guest, an asset, or a security risk. Clear. Geralt regarded him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, his lips curved in something almost like a smile, bitter, brief, but genuine. Clear. I've dealt with military commanders before. Usually right after I've killed something they wanted dead but didn't want to admit existed. He picked up his swords, settling them across his back with familiar weight. Lead the way, Colonel. I'll tell your general about witchers, monsters, and why you really don't want a corrupted kikimora loose in your facility. Already looking forward to that conversation, O'Neill muttered, turning toward the door. Teal'c fell into step beside Geralt, and Daniel followed with his tablet, already formulating questions. Carter brought up the rear, her scientific instrument still recording readings from the Witcher's unique physiology. As they walked through Cheyenne Mountain's corridors, Geralt's medallion continued its faint vibration, and his enhanced senses catalogued every detail of this strange new world. The recycled air, the hum of technology in the walls, the chemical scent of military-grade cleaning supplies. The armed soldiers who watched him pass with wary eyes. The massive blast doors designed to contain threats that shouldn't exist. He'd hunted monsters across the continent for the better part of a century. He'd faced creatures from fairy tales and nightmares, killed things that defied nature, and survived contracts that would have destroyed lesser men. But as he followed Colonel O'Neill deeper into Stargate Command, Geralt suspected he'd stumbled into something far more complex than a simple monster hunt. These people fought threats on a scale that made continent politics look provincial. They traveled between worlds through ancient portals, faced enemies with technology that bordered on magic, and defended a planet that had no idea how close it came to extinction on a regular basis. It was, he decided, exactly the kind of impossible situation that required a Witcher. The kind where normal had stopped applying long ago, and all that mattered was whether you had the skill, the will, and the sheer stubborn competence to face the monsters and survive. The briefing room felt designed for bad news, functional chairs around a functional table, walls decorated with star maps that showed just how small Earth was in the grand scheme of galactic politics. General George Hammond sat at the head of the table with the weathered patience of a career officer who'd seen enough impossible things that one more barely registered. He studied Geralt with eyes that had evaluated threats from Gold System lords to Asgard clones, and seemed to conclude that a white-haired monster hunter with cat eyes fell somewhere in the middle of his scale of concerns. Mr. Geralt, Hammond began, then paused. Is there a rank or title you prefer? Just Geralt, the Witcher said, leaning back in his chair with deceptive casualness. His hands rested on the table, visible, non-threatening. But O'Neill noticed the way his fingers stayed loose, ready to move. Combat awareness, the kind that never fully turned off. Witchers don't have ranks. We have reputations, and we have contracts. That's enough. Very well. Geralt. Hammond folded his hands on the table. Colonel O'Neill's report indicates you killed a hostile creature in our gate room approximately 90 minutes ago, then cooperated with our medical examination. Dar. Fraser's assessment suggests you're human, or were originally, before significant biological modification. You claim to be a professional monster hunter from a place called the Continent, and you arrived through our Stargate while pursuing the creature you killed. Do I have that correct? Close enough, Geralt agreed. Though, biological modification makes it sound cleaner than it was. The trials of the grasses killed most of my friends. The ones who survived stopped being entirely human. We became witchers, useful weapons with short lifespans and shorter welcomes. Daniel had spread images across the table's display screen. Photos of the dead kikimora from multiple angles, its chitin armor cracked where Geralt's silver blade had found vulnerabilities, the black ichor that had tested as completely unknown biological material. This creature. You called it a kikimora. What exactly is it? Water spirit, Geralt said, studying the images with professional detachment. Normally they nest near rivers, feed on fish and small animals. Territorial but not usually aggressive toward humans unless provoked or starving. This one, he pointed at the elongated jaw structure, had been corrupted. Exposed to something that twisted its nature, made it hunt larger prey. The kind of corruption that happens near dimensional rifts, cursed ground, or when someone deliberately poisons an area with dark magic. Dark magic, O'Neill repeated with the tone of someone adding another impossible thing to an already long list. Right. Because apparently regular magic wasn't enough of a problem. Geralt's expression suggested O'Neill wasn't the first skeptic he'd dealt with. Call it whatever helps you sleep. Magic, dimensional energy, quantum manipulation, the labels change, but the effect is the same. There are forces in the universe that can twist living things into something wrong. I've seen villages where every animal turned rabid overnight because some idiot nobleman tried to harness power he didn't understand. I've tracked drowners that evolved from men who drowned in cursed water. The kikimora you saw was dying, the corruption was consuming it from inside. It would have killed everything it encountered until something killed it first. Carter had pulled up the energy readings from the gate activation. The wormhole that brought you here shows anomalous patterns. Standard Stargate travel creates a stable event horizon with predictable energy signatures. Your arrival registered fluctuations consistent with, she paused, frowning at the data. Multiple dimensional intersections. Like the wormhole briefly connected to somewhere that existed in more than 3 spatial dimensions. The conjunction of the spheres, Geralt said quietly. 1500 years ago, multiple worlds collided, not physically, but dimensionally. Barriers between realities thinned. That's when elves, dwarves, monsters, all the elder races came to the continent. Most of the portals closed after the conjunction ended, but some remained. Hidden places where the boundaries stayed thin. Places where things slipped through. And you think this elven structure with the Stargate was one of those places, Daniel said, his academic enthusiasm barely contained. A dimensional weak point where your world and ours briefly overlapped, allowing you to dial our gate from a structure that shouldn't be able to connect to our network. I think the Kikimora found something older than elven civilization, Geralt corrected. Something built by your ancients that the elves claimed when they arrived on the continent. The portal. The Stargate was already there. The elves just built around it, incorporated it into their architecture, treated it as part of their magic without understanding what it really was. Teal'c spoke from his position near the wall, arms crossed over his broad chest. You tracked this creature across your world and through an unknown portal without hesitation. That suggests either foolishness or exceptional dedication to your purpose. Kikimoras hunt in packs, Geralt said flatly. If corrupted specimens found a portal that connected to populated worlds, they would spread. Kill dozens, maybe hundreds, before local authorities organized an effective response. That's not a contract I can walk away from. Not if I want to live with myself afterward. Hammond studied Geralt with renewed interest. That sounds like more than professional obligation, Mr. Geralt. That sounds like conscience. Witchers aren't supposed to have those, Geralt said with bitter humor. The mutations are supposed to suppress emotions, make us better weapons. More focused, less distracted by fear or empathy. But, he shrugged. We're still human enough to know when a choice matters. Still human enough to regret the easy ones. O'Neill leaned forward, elbows on the table. So you're a monster hunter with enhanced abilities, alchemical blood, and magical training from a world that might or might not exist in our galaxy. You can do, he gestured vaguely. Whatever that hand thing was that threw the Kikimora into a wall. You have swords that make our sensors go haywire. And you're claiming there might be more of those creatures out there, possibly coming through the same portal you did. That's accurate, Geralt confirmed. The hand gesture is called a sign, art specifically. Telekinetic force projection. There are 5 signs Witchers learn, art for force, igni for fire, Quen for protective shields, Burden for magical traps, Axii for mental influence. There's simple magic, combat utility, nothing fancy. But effective when you're fighting something that doesn't die easy. Carter was taking notes rapidly. These signs. They're repeatable effects. Consistent energy outputs. With training, yes. Geralt raised his hand, fingers positioning in the familiar pattern. Ard focuses kinetic energy into a directional blast. Useful for creating space, stunning opponents, or breaking through obstacles. Igni channels heat into flame. Effective against creatures vulnerable to fire, or for setting environment hazards. Quen creates a temporary barrier that absorbs damage. Burden traps extra-dimensional entities or slows physical opponents. Axii influences minds, calms animals, confuses enemies. Mind control, O'Neill said carefully, his expression hardening slightly. That's concerning. Influence, Geralt corrected. Not control. Axii works on instinct and emotion. It can calm an angry animal, create momentary confusion, make someone hesitate. It doesn't override free will or create permanent changes. And it's exhausting, every sign drains stamina. Use too many too quickly, and you're vulnerable. He met O'Neill's gaze steadily. I'm telling you this because I prefer people understand what I can do before they start imagining I can do more. Witchers aren't unstoppable. We're just hard to kill. Daniel had been studying the images of Geralt's swords with increasing fascination. The silver sword. You used that specifically against the kikimora. Is silver significant? Silver disrupts magical cohesion, Geralt explained. Creatures that exist through magic, transformation, or curse, they're vulnerable to silver in ways normal steel can't match. The kikimora's carapace would have turned normal blades. Silver cut through because the creature's existence relied on corrupted magic holding its form together. He touched the hilt of the sword across his back. Steel is for humans and natural animals. Silver is for monsters. You learn quickly which sword to draw, or you don't survive long enough to make the mistake twice. And you've been doing this for a century, Hammond said thoughtfully. Hunting monsters, accepting contracts, surviving situations that killed most of your peers. That's an impressive track record, Mr. Geralt. It's survival, Geralt said simply. Witchers don't retire. We keep working until something faster, stronger, or smarter kills us. I've been lucky, skilled, and occasionally smart enough to walk away when a contract smells wrong. That's kept me alive longer than most. Hammond exchanged glances with O'Neill, and something passed between them, command decision, risk assessment, the kind of calculation that happened when you weighed immediate threat against potential asset. Colonel O'Neill, your assessment. O'Neill sat back, considering. He killed a hostile in our gate room with a sword. Cooperated with containment and examination. Answered questions without trying to hide what he is or what he can do. Either he's the most honest person we've met this year, or he's smart enough to know that lying to us would end badly. He looked at Geralt. My gut says honest. Also says he's dangerous, but we're used to dangerous around here. Indeed, Teal'c added. Geralt of Rivia fights with the discipline of a warrior trained from youth. He understands threat assessment and tactical restraint. These are qualities that suggest he could work effectively with SG teams, should the need arise. Which brings us to the obvious question, Hammond said, turning his full attention to Geralt. What do you want, Mr. Geralt? You've come through our Stargate from an unknown location. You've killed a hostile creature on our base. You've been surprisingly forthcoming about your abilities. What happens next largely depends on your intentions. Geralt was quiet for a moment, his golden eyes moving across the faces around the table. Military officers, scientists, warriors, all of them watching him with varying degrees of wariness and curiosity. When he spoke, his voice carried the flat pragmatism of someone who'd learned not to expect much from life but still tried anyway. "I want to go home," he said. "Back to the continent, to my horse, to the next contract." "But," he gestured at the star maps on the walls. "I'm guessing that's not simple. Your people don't know where I came from. The portal I used might not be in your system. And there's still the problem of the kikimoras." "You think there are more," Carter said. "I know there are more," Geralt corrected. "Kikimoras nest in groups. The corrupted one I killed was likely the scout or the weakest of its pack. If the others found the portal structure, if they're drawn to the same energy that attracted the first," he shook his head, "they'll come through eventually. And if they do, people will die. Civilians who don't know how to fight monsters, who don't have silver weapons or signs or the experience to recognize the threat before it's too late." O'Neill leaned forward again. "So you're offering to help?" "I'm offering to do my job," Geralt said. "You want to find the portal I came through, figure out how to send me home. I want that too. But if there are corrupted kikimoras loose somewhere in your gate network, they need to be hunted and killed before they spread. That's Witcher work. That's what I was made for." Hammond considered this, his expression revealing nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Colonel O'Neill, assemble SG-1 for immediate deployment. Dr. Jackson, work with Mr. Geralt to narrow down possible gate addresses based on his description of the portal structure. Major Carter, I want a full analysis of the energy readings from his arrival. If there's a way to backtrack the connection, find it. Mr. Geralt," he fixed the Witcher with a commanding stare. "You'll accompany SG-1 through the gate. Consider this a field evaluation. You help us assess potential threats, we help you find your way home. Understood?" "Understood," Geralt said, and if he felt any concern about stepping back through the Stargate into unknown danger, it didn't show on his face. O'Neill stood, already mentally running through mission prep protocols. "Welcome to SG-1, Geralt. Try not to kill anything that we're currently allied with. The list changes frequently, so when in doubt, ask first, stab later." "That's usually good advice," Geralt agreed, rising from his chair. His medallion twitched against his chest as he moved, responding to the ambient ancient technology woven through Cheyenne Mountain's walls. Somewhere in the gate network, corrupted kikimoras were hunting. And for the first time in SGC's operational history, they had a Witcher ready to hunt them back. The planet designated P4X-639 materialized through the event horizon in the usual rush of compressed sensation. Atoms scattered and reassembled, consciousness briefly touching the quantum foam between origin and destination. Geralt stumbled slightly as he emerged on the other side, one hand bracing against the DHD while his enhanced physiology adjusted to gate travel in ways evolution had never prepared for. His medallion vibrated violently against his chest, and for a disorienting moment, every sentence screamed contradictory information about where he was and whether the space around him was stable. "First time's always rough," O'Neill said, already scanning their surroundings with his P90 raised. "You get used to it. Eventually. Maybe." Reassuring, Geralt muttered, forcing his breathing steady and his eyes to focus. They'd emerged on a stone platform surrounded by dense forest, trees with bark that shimmered faintly purple in the twilight, vegetation that rustled with sounds that weren't quite wind. Two moons hung low on the horizon, one silver and one pale amber, casting overlapping shadows that made depth perception unreliable. The air tasted of copper and ozone, familiar sensations that made his Witcher instincts prickle with warning. Carter was already taking readings with her handheld scanner. Atmosphere is breathable, slightly higher oxygen content than Earth. Gravity is 0.97 Earth normal. Temperature is comfortable. No immediate signs of Goa'uld presence, no Naquadah signatures beyond the Stargate itself. No advanced civilization detected, Daniel added, consulting his own instruments while studying the Stargate's address symbols. But the local population reported demons from the night attacking their villages 3 weeks ago. Multiple casualties, survivors describing creatures that hunt in water and drag victims away. Kikimoras, Geralt said with certainty, kneeling to examine the ground near the gate platform. His enhanced vision picked out details invisible to normal humans, disturbed soil patterns, claw marks scored deep into ancient stone, traces of the same black ichor that had stained the SGC gate room. They've been here. Multiple specimens, hunting together. He touched one of the claw marks, felt the residual energy that clung to it. Recently. Within the last few days. Teal'c moved to the platform's edge, staff weapon ready, scanning the forest perimeter with Jaffa-trained vigilance. How many creatures do you estimate? Geralt studied the tracks, the displacement patterns, the way vegetation had been disturbed by something large moving through underbrush. 4, maybe 5. Adult kikimoras, all showing signs of corruption. They're coordinating, which means they're not completely mindless yet. That makes them more dangerous. Great, O'Neill said. So we've got a pack of your water demons who are smart enough to work together but crazy enough to attack villages. Any good news you want to share? They're nocturnal hunters, Geralt offered, glancing at the twin moons. They'll nest somewhere near water during daylight, become active after dark. If we find their nest before nightfall, we can engage them on our terms. Fight them in their den before they scatter to hunt. And if we don't find the nest? Carter asked. Geralt's expression was grim. Then they find us after dark, in terrain they know better than we do, with numerical advantage and the element of surprise. I've fought kikimoras before. They're ambush predators. They'll separate us, drag victims into water, drown them or tear them apart below the surface. Fighting them in open water is suicide. Daniel had pulled up the mission briefing on his tablet. The local village is approximately 2 kilometers south of the gate. Population of maybe 300, pre-industrial technology level. They've lost 17 people to these attacks over the past 3 weeks. The village elder who contacted us through an old communication device said the demons come from the old ruins near the sacred pool. Sacred pool, Geralt repeated. That's where they'll nest. Kikimoras are drawn to places with ambient magic or dimensional instability. If there's an ancient structure near water, that's perfect habitat. O'Neill checked his watch. We've got maybe 4 hours of daylight left, local time. Can we reach these ruins, clear out the nest, and get back to the gate before dark? Depends on the terrain and how many of them are actually there, Geralt said, already moving toward the forest edge. His Witcher senses extended outward, cataloging sounds and scents invisible to his companions. Running water, approximately 1 kilometer southeast. Chemical traces in the air that suggested decaying organic matter, old kills, feeding grounds. Something else, fainter but familiar, the metallic tang of corrupted magic, dimensional bleed, the same wrongness that had driven the first kikimora to the portal. They moved through the forest in tactical formation, O'Neill on point with Geralt slightly ahead and to the right, using his enhanced senses to detect threats before visual contact. Teal'c brought up the rear, staff weapon tracking potential ambush angles. Carter and Daniel stayed center, instruments recording data while maintaining combat readiness. The forest felt wrong in ways Geralt recognized from a century of hunting monsters. The silence was too complete. No bird calls, no insect sounds, no small animals rustling through underbrush. Predators created dead zones around their territory, areas where everything with survival instincts learned to avoid. The purple-barked trees showed claw marks where something had marked territory, and the undergrowth displayed the kind of damage that came from large creatures moving without concern for stealth. We're in their hunting ground, Geralt said quietly, his hand resting on the hilt of his silver sword. They know we're here. Can they smell us? O'Neill asked, his voice equally low. Probably. Kikimoras have excellent olfactory senses, especially near water. They're tracking us the same way I'm tracking them, scent, sound, disturbance patterns. Geralt paused, his medallion vibrating more insistently. There's something else. The corruption isn't just affecting the kikimoras. It's saturating the environment. The plants, the soil, the water, everything here has been exposed to whatever twisted those creatures. Carter's scanner chimed softly. He's right. I'm detecting unusual energy signatures throughout the area. It's similar to the readings we got from Geralt's arrival, dimensional instability, multiple reality intersections. This whole region is experiencing some kind of spatial-temporal distortion. In common, O'Neill requested. The walls between dimensions are thin here, Daniel translated, studying the data. Like Geralt described with the conjunction of the spheres. This planet might be experiencing its own version, a weak point where other realities are bleeding through. Which means the kikimoras didn't just find a portal, Geralt said, his tactical assessment shifting rapidly. They found a dimensional wound. A place where the barriers between worlds are breaking down. That's why they're corrupted, they're being poisoned by exposure to incompatible realities. They emerged from the forest into a clearing, and the ruins sprawled before them like broken teeth. Ancient stone architecture, definitely not indigenous to this planet. All precise angles and flowing curves that matched Geralt's description of elven construction. But these weren't elven buildings. Beneath the organic additions and weathered surfaces, Daniel recognized the unmistakable signature of ancient technology. A research outpost, perhaps, or an observation post built to study the dimensional anomaly. And at the center of the ruins, where collapsed walls formed a natural amphitheater around a still pool of dark water, they found the nest. Bones littered the edges, humanoid remains, probably from the village, picked clean and scattered with casual disregard. The water itself was wrong, too dark, too still, with an oily sheen that reflected the twin moons with nauseating distortion. For massive shapes lay partially submerged, chitinous armor glistening wet, too many joints in limbs that ended in blade-length talons. For visible, Teal'c observed quietly. There may be more beneath the water. Geralt had drawn both swords now, silver in his right hand, steel in his left. Unusual dual wielding that suggested he expected to fight both corrupted creatures and something else. The corruption is worse than I thought. These aren't just kikimoras anymore. They're becoming something else, transitional forms between their original nature and whatever reality is bleeding through here. One of the creatures stirred, its head rising from the water with predatory awareness. Multiple eyes opened along what should have been a jaw, glowing faintly with bioluminescence that had never been part of kikimora biology. It made a sound, not the shriek from the SGC gate room, but something deeper, resonant, like whale song filtered through broken glass and dimensional static. The other three kikimoras rose from the pool in response, water streaming from carapaces that shifted and writhed as if the chitin itself was alive and rethinking its configuration. They were larger than the first specimen, more heavily armored, and clearly more advanced in their corruption. One had developed what looked like vestigial wings, membranous and wrong. Another had too many limbs, extras sprouting from its thorax in asymmetrical clusters. Contact, O'Neill said calmly, his P-90 already tracking the nearest target. Weapons free. Aim for the joints where the armor looks thinner. The kikimoras charged. Geralt moved first, art blasting from his left hand in a telekinetic shockwave that caught the lead creature and hurled it sideways into ancient stonework. The impact cracked both chitin and architecture. He followed immediately, silver sword leading in an upward slash that found the gap between head and thorax, black ichor spraying across ruins that had stood for millions of years. P-90 fire chattered in controlled bursts, Carter and O'Neill working in tandem to suppress the creature with vestigial wings. The round sparked against carapace, found softer tissue underneath, drew more of that wrong black blood. Teal'c's staff weapon discharged with its distinctive energy whine, the plasma blast taking one kikimora in the cluster of extra limbs and burning through corrupted flesh. But there were more. They rose from the pool like nightmares learning to breathe air, two more, then three, then a fifth that was barely recognizable as kikimora anymore. This one had undergone complete transformation, its body elongated and serpentine, multiple heads sprouting from a central mass that pulsed with the same dimensional distortion that saturated the ruins. "That's not a kikimora," Geralt said, his professional assessment cold and certain. "That's something else wearing its corpse." The multi-headed horror screamed with voices that existed in frequencies human ears weren't meant to process. The sound hit like physical force, and Geralt felt blood trickle from his nose as his enhanced senses overloaded trying to interpret the dimensional noise. Then the real fight began. Geralt's Quen shield flared golden as the multi-headed abomination lunged, its reality-twisted mass moving with speed that defied its size. Talons scraped against magical barrier with sounds like tearing metal, and the impact drove Geralt backward across slick stone. The shield held for 3 heartbeats, then shattered in cascading sparks that left his arms numb and his stamina reserves depleted by a third. "Spread out," O'Neill commanded, combat instincts overriding shock at seeing something that shouldn't exist outside fever dreams. "Don't let it focus on one target." The SG-1 team scattered with practiced coordination. Carter rolled left, P-90 firing controlled bursts at the serpentine body's underbelly where corrupted flesh showed between chitin plates. Teal'c moved right, staff weapon discharging plasma that seared through one of the creature's multiple heads. The head screamed, thrashed, but 2 more sprouted from the burning stump like Hydra mythology made flesh and dimensional horror. "Cutting them makes more," Daniel shouted from behind cover, his sidearm firing with academic precision at a standard kikimora attempting to flank their position. "Geralt, how do we kill it?" "Fire." Geralt called back, already moving, silver sword deflecting a strike from the nearest standard kikimora while his left hand traced Igni's pattern. Flame burst from his palm, caught the corrupted creature full in its mass of heads, and the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The dimensional wrongness that held the abomination together couldn't survive sustained heat, flesh boiled, chitin cracked, and the screaming intensified as reality itself tried to reject what the creature had become. But there were still 4 standard kikimoras, and they'd learned from watching their transformed packmate die. They spread out, circling, using the ruins for cover and the failing light to mask their movements. Geralt's enhanced night vision tracked them easily, but his human companions had seconds at most before the creatures exploited the growing shadows. "Carter, thermite grenades if you have them." Geralt pivoted, steel sword coming up to block a strike from behind, the impact jarring his shoulders. The kikimora that had attacked was fast, coordinated, using the momentary distraction to press advantage. Its jaws gaped wide enough to bite a man in half. Geralt's Ard blast caught it point blank, the telekinetic force not just pushing but crushing, driving the creature backward and down into the dark pool. It hit water with a massive splash, disappeared beneath the oily surface, and Geralt knew with absolute certainty it would emerge somewhere unexpected in the next 30 seconds. Carter had her grenades out, priming them with swift efficiency. "Thermite burns at 4,000 degrees. Clear the blast radius." She hurled 2 grenades toward the burning abomination, and O'Neill added a third for good measure. The devices detonated in sequential white-hot fury, and the creature's screams became something beyond sound, dimensional feedback, reality asserting itself against an impossibility that had existed too long in the wrong universe. When the light faded, nothing remained but scorched stone and the acrid smell of burned meat and ozone. 3 contacts still active, Teal'c reported, his staff weapon tracking movement through the ruins. 2 flanking from the east, 1 submerged in the pool. Geralt was already moving toward the pool, both swords ready. Kikimoras were ambush predators, the submerged one would strike when it thought it had advantage, probably targeting whoever stood closest to the water's edge. He positioned himself deliberately, making himself bait, and called over his shoulder. "When it surfaces, hit it with everything. Don't let it drag anyone under." The water exploded upward. The kikimora burst from the pool trailing darkness and distortion, its jaws aimed for Geralt's torso with killing precision. But Geralt had fought water predators for decades. He'd timed the lunge, anticipated the trajectory, and his silver sword was already moving in the arc that would intercept the creature's throat. Steel met corrupted flesh, and the blade bit deep. Black ichor fountained as Geralt twisted, using the kikimora's momentum against it, redirecting its mass toward the stone platform instead of into the water where it wanted to fight. The creature crashed down hard, and before it could recover, P90 fire from 3 directions tore through its exposed underbelly. 2 left. They came together, coordinated, learning from their pack's deaths with predatory intelligence that made them far more dangerous than mindless monsters. One went high, launching itself from ruined walls toward Teal'c with all talons extended. The other went low, serpentine movement across stone aimed at Carter's position with clear intent to separate and kill. Teal'c met his attacker with Jaffa combat prowess honed over decades. His staff weapon blocked the initial strike, the impact driving him backward but not down. He twisted, used the staff as lever and weapon both, and the discharge at point-blank range cored through the kikimora's chest cavity. It collapsed in a twitching heap, corruption bleeding out into ancient stone. The final kikimora reached Carter a heartbeat before Geralt could intercept. She fired, controlled bursts walking up its carapace, but the armor held and the creature's momentum carried it forward. Talons extended for the kill. Geralt's art blast hit the kikimora from the side with every ounce of force he could channel through exhausted reserves. The creature flew sideways, trajectory altered enough that its strike missed Carter by inches. It crashed into rubble, disoriented but not dead, already scrambling to right itself. O'Neill's P90 barked once, twice, 3 times, precise shots into the gaps where Geralt's earlier strikes had weakened armor. The kikimora shuddered, tried to rise, and Daniel's pistol added the final rounds that dropped it permanently. Silence fell over the ruins, broken only by heavy breathing and the disturbing sounds of dying creatures settling into stillness. The dark pool reflected twin moons with less distortion now, as if the dimensional wound had begun healing with the corrupted kikimora's deaths. Everyone intact? O'Neill asked, already checking his team with practiced efficiency. Intact, Carter confirmed, though her hands shook slightly as she reloaded. Those things were. Abominations, Geralt finished, cleaning black ichor from his swords with methodical movements. His medallion had finally stopped its violent vibration, settling into relative calm. Creatures caught between dimensions, twisted by exposure to realities they were never meant to experience. The dimensional wound here, he gestured at the ruins around them. It's been bleeding corruption into everything. The kikimoras were first affected because they nested near the source, but given enough time, the entire planet's ecosystem would have transformed. Daniel was already examining the ancient structure with renewed urgency. Then we need to close the wound. If this is an ancient outpost, there should be controls, some way to stabilize the dimensional barriers. Or we could blow it up, O'Neill suggested. I'm just saying, explosives have solved a lot of our ancient technology problems. Teal'c approached one of the dead kikimoras, studying it with warrior's assessment. Geralt of Rivia, you fought with great skill. The silver blade. It was far more effective against these creatures than our energy weapons. Silver disrupts magical cohesion, Geralt explained, sheathing his swords and pulling a potion from his belt. The liquid inside glowed faintly amber, swallow, accelerated healing for the bruised ribs and strained muscles that came with fighting things stronger than humans were meant to face. He drank it in one practiced motion, felt the familiar burn as Witcher metabolism processed the toxic compounds into accelerated tissue repair. But your weapons worked too. These creatures existed partly through dimensional corruption, partly through physical form. Destroying either aspect kills them. Carter had her scanner out, taking readings from the dimensional wound at the pool's center. The distortion is already stabilizing. With the corrupted creatures dead, there's nothing actively widening the breach. Given time, this planet's natural dimensional barriers should reassert themselves. How much time? O'Neill wanted specifics. Weeks, maybe months. Carter looked up from her instruments. But the immediate threat is neutralized. No more creatures should be able to come through, and the existing corruption will fade as the wound heals. Daniel had found what he was looking for, an ancient control interface partially buried under centuries of accumulated debris. His fingers traced the symbols with academic reverence. This was a research station. The ancients were studying dimensional mechanics, testing theories about multiple realities and how to navigate between them. Something went wrong, or maybe the experiment succeeded too well. They created a controlled dimensional intersection point, which eventually became uncontrolled, Geralt said, joining Daniel at the interface. His medallion twitched faintly near the ancient technology, responding to the residual power that still flowed through million-year-old systems. The conjunction of the spheres on the continent happened the same way, deliberate magical manipulation that spiraled beyond anyone's ability to contain. The elves thought they could harness the power. Instead, they opened doors that couldn't be fully closed. The elven structure you described, Daniel said, excitement creeping into his voice despite the recent combat. Geralt, what if that wasn't just an ancient outpost the elves found? What if it was an intersection point? A place where your world and this dimensional network overlap, where the ancients' experiments created a bridge between the Stargate system and the continent? Geralt considered this, his Witcher's pragmatism warring with the implications. You're saying the portal I came through connects to your gate network because your ancients built it to connect multiple realities, not just multiple planets. It would explain the energy readings from your arrival, Carter said, already running calculations. Standard Stargate travel moves you through space. What you experienced moved you through space and dimensions simultaneously. The address you dialed, if we can reconstruct it from the data, might give us a way to send you home. First we need to make sure home is still there, O'Neill interjected, practical as always. Geralt, you said kikimoras hunt in packs. We killed 5 here, plus the one at the SGC. Is that all of them? Geralt walked to the pool's edge, studying the water with enhanced senses. The corruption had faded significantly, but traces remained. Scent markers, territorial signs, the lingering evidence of creatures that had nested here for weeks. This was the primary nest. All the adults were here. But kikimoras lay eggs. If there are juveniles. A splash from deeper in the pool cut him off. Something small emerged from the dark water, not attack, but curiosity. A juvenile kikimora, perhaps a quarter the size of the adults, its carapace still soft and underdeveloped. It had the same too many joints, the same blade talons, but its eyes held intelligence without madness. No corruption yet, just a young predator investigating the sudden silence where its pack had been. 4 weapons trained on it instantly. Wait, Geralt said, his voice cutting through the tension. He studied the juvenile, noted the lack of dimensional distortion, the absence of corruption markers that had twisted the adults. It's clean. Born after its parents were corrupted, or young enough that the dimensional bleed hasn't affected it yet. It's still a monster, O'Neill said, but his finger wasn't on the trigger. It's a juvenile predator in its natural habitat, Geralt corrected. Kikimoras are dangerous to humans, yes. But they're part of their ecosystem. They control populations of other species, maintain balance. This one, he watched the juvenile retreat slowly back into the pool, survival instincts telling it that the strange creatures who'd killed its pack were threats to avoid. It'll grow, hunt, probably avoid human settlements after learning what happened here. It's a monster, Colonel. But not all monsters need killing. O'Neill studied Geralt for a long moment, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition that the universe contained more moral complexity than military objectives usually allowed for. Your call, Witcher. You're the expert on monsters. Geralt nodded slowly, watching the juvenile disappear beneath the dark water. Let it live. It's not corrupted, not a threat unless humans encroach on its territory. The villagers will need to stay away from these ruins, treat this as forbidden ground. But that's survivable. That's coexistence. Teal'c shouldered his staff weapon. A warrior who knows when not to kill is wiser than one who knows only combat. They left the ruins as twin moons climbed higher, casting silver and amber light across ancient stones and newly dead monsters. The dimensional wound would heal. The surviving kikimora would live or die by natural selection. And somewhere in the Stargate network's vast database, there might be coordinates that could send a Witcher home. But as they walked back through the forest toward the gate, Geralt couldn't shake the growing suspicion that home might be more complicated than dialing an address and stepping through a portal. The continent existed somewhere between dimensions, connected to this network through ancient experiments that had outlasted their creators. Going back might mean understanding dimensional mechanics that even the ancients hadn't fully controlled. It meant accepting that some paths led forward, not back. And some contracts couldn't be completed with a simple kill. The village of Teal'c sprawled across a hillside 2 kilometers south of the ruins, its structures built from local timber and clay with the practical efficiency of people who understood their environment and respected its dangers. Smoke rose from evening cook fires as SG-1 approached, and the villagers emerged from homes with the cautious hope of those who'd lived under threat too long to celebrate prematurely. The village elder, a woman named Shira with gray-streaked hair and hands scarred from decades of labor, met them at the communal square. Her eyes widened when she saw the black ichor staining Geralt's armor and the weapons the others carried, then settled into weary relief. The demons? She asked in accented English learned from previous SGC contact. They are dead. Dead, O'Neill confirmed. The nest is destroyed. You shouldn't have any more attacks, but I'd recommend staying away from the old ruins. Treat them as forbidden ground, there's still residual energy there that could be dangerous. Shira's relief was palpable, her shoulders sagging as tension bled away. 17 of our people. 17 taken in the night, dragged to the water, never seen again. The gods brought you to answer our prayers. Not gods, Daniel said gently, the correction automatic after years of fighting gold false divinity. Just people trying to help. The creatures were affected by something beyond your control, dimensional instability from ancient technology. It's over now. But Geralt had noticed something the others hadn't, the way several villagers watched him with expressions that mixed fear with recognition. Not of him specifically, but of what he represented. A young woman with a child clutched to her hip whispered something to her neighbor, and Geralt's enhanced hearing caught the word even across the square's distance, mutant. Shira followed his gaze, then looked at Geralt with new assessment. You are not like the others. Your eyes, they see in ways human eyes should not. You move like the hunters from the old stories, the ones who walked between worlds and killed what gods and men could not. I'm a witcher, Geralt said flatly, deciding honesty was simpler than deception. A monster hunter. I was made to kill creatures like the ones that attacked your village. The mutations that changed me, they make me effective at my work, but they also make me something people fear. He met her gaze steadily. I'm used to fear. It comes with the job. Fear and gratitude often walk together, Shira said, surprising him with her directness. You killed the demons. That matters more than what you are. She raised her voice, addressing the gathered villagers. This hunter saved our children. His companions from beyond the stars came when we called for help. Tonight we feast in their honor, and tomorrow we rebuild without fear of the night. The celebration that followed was modest. Roasted meat from local game, bread baked with grain the SGC's agricultural assessments had deemed nutritionally adequate, and a fermented drink that tasted like honey mixed with something Daniel's linguistic database translated as moonflower essence. The villagers sang songs in their native language, melodies that spoke of survival and community and the small victories that kept civilizations alive in a dangerous galaxy. Geralt sat slightly apart from the main gathering, his witcher nature making prolonged social interaction uncomfortable and his enhanced senses finding the noise and crowd overwhelming. Carter joined him after an hour, carrying 2 cups of the moonflower drink and settling onto the log bench with the easy camaraderie of someone who'd shared combat. "You handled the nest well," she said, offering him 1 cup. "That trick with the fire, Igni, you called it?" The dimensional abomination couldn't maintain cohesion under sustained heat. Its existence relied on keeping multiple reality states quantum-locked, and the thermal energy forced decoherence. Geralt accepted the drink, translating her scientific terminology into concepts his Witcher training could parse. "Magic that holds things together breaks down under fire. I've fought wraiths, specters, creatures that exist partially in death realms. Silver disrupts their cohesion, but fire forces them fully into physical reality where they can be killed properly." "Same principle," Carter agreed. "Different vocabulary. That's what's fascinating about your signs. They're producing effects we'd normally associate with advanced technology or ancient gene-activated abilities, but you're doing it through learned patterns and what you call stamina. No visible power source, no equipment, just," she gestured vaguely, "directed will and biological adaptation." "The trials of the grasses changed more than just muscles and reflexes," Geralt explained. "They open channels in our bodies for magic to flow. Signs are simple patterns. Any mage could do more impressive displays. But Witchers need combat utility over spectacle. Art pushes enemies away. Igni burns what needs burning. Quen protects when you can't dodge. They're tools, not art." Carter sipped her drink thoughtfully. "On Earth, we've encountered people with what we call psychic abilities, telekinesis, pyrokinesis, mental influence. They're rare and usually connected to ancient gene expression or gold genetic manipulation. But you're saying your world had systematic methods for creating these abilities through alchemical mutation?" "The mages of Kaer Morhen spent centuries perfecting the trials," Geralt confirmed. "Trial of the grasses. Herbal compounds that rewrote cellular structure. Trial of dreams, psychological conditioning through magically induced nightmares. Trial of the medallion, binding Witcher senses to magical detection. Most candidates died during the grasses. More died in the dreams. Those who survived both became Witchers, but," his expression darkened. "The price was high. Emotion suppressed, fertility destroyed, humanity traded for effectiveness. Genetic engineering for combat purposes," Carter said quietly. "We've seen that before. The Goa'uld created the Jaffa to serve as incubators and warriors. The ancients experimented with human enhancement. Even on Earth, there have been," she paused, choosing words carefully, "unethical programs that tried to create enhanced soldiers. It never ends well." "No," Geralt agreed. "It doesn't. Witchers were created to fight monsters, but we became monsters in the eyes of those we protected. Parents threaten children with us. Villagers pay for our services, then drive us away once the contract's complete. We're useful tools that remind people too much of what they fear." Across the square, Daniel was engaged in animated conversation with several villagers, his linguistic enthusiasm making them laugh despite the language barriers. Teal'c stood near the elder's home, respectfully observing the cultural practices while maintaining his warrior's vigilance. O'Neill had found the local equivalent of a tavern keeper and was attempting to determine if the moonflower drink qualified as officially off-duty appropriate for military personnel. "They're good people," Geralt observed, watching SG-1 interact with the villagers. "Your team. They function like a proper hunting party, each member covering the other's weaknesses, trusting each other's competence. That's rare. Most groups fragment under pressure." "We've been through a lot together," Carter said. 5 years of impossible missions, impossible odds, impossible enemies. You learn to trust your team or you don't survive. Colonel O'Neill taught me that, military training gives you tactics, but only experience teaches you when to follow the plan and when to improvise. And the Jaffa, Teal'c. He fought for your enemies before joining you. Teal'c was first prime to Apophis, one of the most powerful Goa'uld system lords. He carried a symbiote, commanded armies, enforced his God's will across dozens of worlds. Carter's respect was evident in her tone. Then he met us, saw that the Goa'uld were false gods, and chose freedom over power. He's been fighting his former masters ever since, inspiring the Jaffa rebellion across the galaxy. He gave up everything to do what was right. Geralt understood that kind of choice, the moment when personal code mattered more than survival. The Jaffa carry symbiotes. Parasitic entities. Goa'uld larvae. The Jaffa were genetically engineered to incubate them, sustain them until maturity. The symbiote grants enhanced strength, healing, extended life. But it also creates dependency. Remove the symbiote before it's mature, and the Jaffa dies. They're slaves to their biology, servants to beings who claim divinity through stolen technology and parasitic possession. False gods who enslave through biology, Geralt said, his professional interest sharpening. Are the Goa'uld parasites vulnerable to silver? Carter blinked at the tactical question. We've never tested it. Standard weapons work, bullets, energy blasts, explosives. But if silver disrupts magical cohesion, and if the Goa'uld symbiotes maintain themselves through some form of bioelectric field, she pulled out her ever-present notepad, already sketching theoretical frameworks. It's worth investigating. If silver could disrupt the symbiote without killing the host, that would be a significant tactical advantage. That's a Witcher's specialty, Geralt said. Killing the monster without destroying the victim. Ghouls that possess corpses, spirits that inhabit living hosts, curses that transform humans into beasts, we've developed methods for separation when the host can be saved. He paused, considering the implications. But I'd need to examine a Goa'uld symbiote to know if the principles apply. Living specimen preferred, though a preserved corpse could work. We have both in storage at the SGC, Carter said, excitement creeping into her scientific tone. Multiple Goa'uld specimens from various system lords, preserved Jaffa symbiotes at different maturation stages, even some Teal'c samples for comparison. If you're willing to consult, our xenobiology department would be thrilled. Professional rates apply, Geralt interrupted, his expression suggesting he'd learned long ago to establish payment terms before people started expecting free expertise. I'm a contractor, not a research subject or unpaid consultant. You want my knowledge about monsters, parasites, and how to kill things that shouldn't exist. That's Witcher work, and Witcher work costs coin. Carter's smile suggested she'd expected this. General Hammond authorized payment for contracted specialists. We can discuss rates, but, she gestured at the village celebration around them. You just saved 300 people from dimensional horrors using medieval weapons and magic hand gestures. I think the SGC can afford your consulting fees. Good, Geralt said, draining his cup. The moonflower drink was stronger than it tasted, warming his enhanced metabolism in ways that suggested fermentation processes significantly more complex than standard alcohol. Because I have a feeling your galaxy has more monsters than mine ever did. Different classifications, maybe, aliens instead of curses, technology instead of magic, but monsters nonetheless. You're not wrong, Carter admitted. The Goa'uld enslave civilizations and claim to be gods. The replicators consume entire planets for raw materials. The Ori convert or destroy anyone who won't worship them. We've encountered threats that make your kikimoras look simple. Simple. Geralt raised an eyebrow. You saw what dimensional corruption did to those creatures. Made them into transitional nightmares between realities. That's not simple, that's existential horror with claws. Fair point, Carter conceded. But at least kikimoras can be killed with fire and silver. Some of our enemies require planetary-scale weapons or ancient technology we barely understand. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the celebration continue. Children played near the fires despite the late hour, their laughter evidence that fear had lifted. Parents held each other with relief visible in every gesture. The village would rebuild, would remember the 17 lost, would teach their children about the demons from the ruins and the strangers who came through the stars to help. Eventually, O'Neill approached their position, carrying what appeared to be 3 more cups of moonflower drink and moving with the careful precision of someone suspecting he'd already had enough. Carter. Geralt. We've got a situation. Define situation, Carter said, immediately shifting to tactical alertness. The good kind, actually. O'Neill offered them the drinks, then gestured toward Daniel, who was hurrying across the square with his tablet held triumphantly. Daniel found something. Apparently the village elder has records. Oral histories passed down through generations, about star travelers who visited this planet centuries ago. And, he paused for effect. One of those travelers matched Geralt's description. White hair, gold eyes, 2 swords, hunted monsters that came through dimensional rifts. Geralt set down his cup carefully, his full attention now on O'Neill. Another Witcher. Here. Maybe, Daniel said, arriving breathless with academic excitement. Or maybe the same Witcher, if your extended lifespan is as significant as you suggested. The timeline is imprecise, oral histories are notoriously difficult to date, but Shira's ancestors recorded a story about a hunter who came through the Ring of Stars during a time of great darkness, killed creatures that wore the night as armor, then left with a promise to return if the demons came again. How long ago? Geralt asked. Daniel consulted his notes. Conservative estimate. 300 years. But the details are remarkably specific, the description of your swords, the magic gestures that match your signs, even the way the hunter's medallion sang warnings of danger. Either you've been here before, or another Witcher from my school found the dimensional intersection before I did, Geralt finished. His mind raced through possibilities. The Witcher schools were independent, scattered across the continent. Communication between them was irregular at best. If someone from Kaer Morhen had discovered the ancient portal centuries ago, had explored the Stargate network, had hunted monsters on alien worlds, there would be records. Trail signs. The kind of professional markers Witchers left for each other when working dangerous contracts in unknown territory. I need to see the ruins again, Geralt said, standing abruptly. The ancient structure. If another Witcher was here, they would have left markers. Signs that only someone with our training would recognize. Warnings about what they found, what they fought, where they went next. O'Neill checked his watch. It's late, the moons are setting, and we've all been fighting dimensional horrors for the past 6 hours. Can this wait until morning? No, Geralt said flatly. If there's evidence of another Witcher in your gate network, if they left a trail, I need to follow it. The path. He paused, searching for words to explain concepts that were foundational to Witcher culture. The path is what we call our life's journey. Following contracts, hunting monsters, leaving markers for those who come after. If another Witcher walked this path before me, their trail might lead to answers about how the continent connects to your network. Carter was already on her feet. And it might give us the gate address you need to get home. That too, Geralt agreed. But more than that. If a Witcher has been traveling through your stargates for 3 centuries, hunting monsters on alien worlds, they've accumulated knowledge. Experience. Maybe understanding about why the dimensional barriers are failing. Teal'c appeared at Geralt's shoulder, staff weapon ready. Then we hunt this trail together. A warrior alone is vulnerable. A team covers all approaches. O'Neill sighed the sigh of a commander who knew his team was about to do something dangerous regardless of his practical objections. Fine. We go back to the ruins. But if we get eaten by whatever juvenile kikimora we left alive, I'm blaming the Witcher. Fair enough, Geralt said, already moving toward the village edge. Behind them, the celebration continued. But SG-1 walked back into the forest, toward ancient ruins and dimensional wounds, following a trail that might have been left 3 centuries ago by someone who hunted monsters between the stars. The path stretched forward and backward simultaneously, connecting past and present through professional markers that transcended language and dimension. And somewhere in the Stargate network, another Witcher's trail waited to be found. The ruins looked different under starlight, less threatening without corrupted kikimoras, but more mysterious as shadows played across ancient stonework that had witnessed civilizations rise and fall. Geralt moved through the debris with purpose, his enhanced night vision rendering the darkness nearly transparent, while SG-1 followed with tactical lights that swept across collapsed walls and weathered inscriptions. "What exactly are we looking for?" O'Neill asked, his P-90's mounted flashlight tracking Geralt's movements. "A sign that says, Witcher was here." "Close," Geralt said, kneeling near the pool's edge where black ichor still stained stone. His fingers traced patterns in the rock face, scratches that might have been natural weathering to untrained eyes, but to someone who'd spent decades reading trail signs, they told stories. Witchers use a simple code. 3 parallel lines mean, dangerous contract completed here. A circle with a slash means, avoid this location. Crossed swords indicate, another Witcher working this region. He paused, his medallion twitching as his fingers found what he'd been searching for. And this. A wolf's head carved into stone, means, School of the Wolf, Kaer Morhen, safe passage offered. Daniel had his camera out, documenting the carving. That's your school's symbol. So another Witcher from Kaer Morhen was definitely here. Not just here, Geralt said, following the stone facing toward the ancient control interface Daniel had examined earlier. More carvings appeared as he searched, weathered but deliberate. Directional markers, warnings, the accumulated trail signs of someone who'd spent time studying this location. They mapped the ruins. Documented the dimensional intersection, left instruction. Carter was scanning the carvings with equipment that could read material composition and approximate age. "Colonel, these markings are approximately 290 years old, give or take a decade. Whoever made them used a steel blade with specific mineral composition, matches the analysis of Geralt's steel sword almost exactly. So a Witcher from your school was here 3 centuries ago," O'Neill summarized. "Killed monsters, helped the locals, carved some helpful graffiti, then left. That tracks with the oral histories. What we don't know is where they went next." Geralt had reached the ancient interface, and his medallion was vibrating intensely now. The control panel was partially active, faint blue light pulsing through symbols that Daniel had only partially decoded. But overlaid on the ancient inscriptions, someone had carved additional markers, Witcher notation that transformed the alien technology into something a monster hunter could interpret. "They figured it out," Geralt said, wonder creeping into his voice despite his usual stoicism. "Whoever was here, they learned to read ancient symbols. Translated them into our notation system." His fingers traced the carvings, translating as he read. "Portal network. Multiple worlds. Monsters travel between dimensions. Follow the path through stars." They were documenting the Stargate system, Daniel said, moving closer with scholarly excitement. "Using it, understanding it, traveling between worlds the same way we do. Geralt, your predecessor might have visited dozens of planets, encountered multiple alien species, fought threats across the galaxy. And left a trail," Geralt interrupted, pointing to a sequence of symbols carved beneath the ancient interface. 7 marks, each representing a Stargate chevron position. Gate coordinates. The next world they visited after this one. Carter was already recording the sequence, her equipment capturing every detail. These match standard Stargate address formatting. 7 symbols for spatial coordinates plus point of origin. If we dial this address, we might find more trail markers, Geralt finished. More information about where they went, what they fought, how they navigated between the continent and your network. He looked at O'Neill. "I need to follow this trail, Colonel. It's more than just finding my way home now. If another Witcher has been traveling your galaxy for 3 centuries, they've accumulated knowledge that could be vital. About dimensional barriers, about monsters that cross between realities, about whether you're the only monster hunter in our database, O'Neill finished. He exchanged glances with his team, command decision forming. Carter, can we dial this address? It's within our galaxy, one of the regions we've explored but not extensively mapped. No current Goa'uld presence in the sector, no reported system lord activity. Should be relatively safe. Carter's tone suggested she knew relatively safe meant very little in gate operations. Teal'c studied the carved coordinates with Warrior's assessment. If this world was significant enough for a Witcher to mark it, there may be threats present that warrant investigation. The path they followed could lead to understanding threats we have not yet encountered. Or it could be a 300-year-old dead end, O'Neill countered. But I'll admit, the idea that there's been a Witcher wandering around the galaxy hunting monsters for longer than the United States has existed is concerning enough to warrant investigation. If nothing else, we should know what kind of threats they were tracking. Daniel had photographed every carving, his tablet filling with data that would fuel months of research. There's something else here. Additional notation I can't quite translate. It looks like warnings about specific creature types. Geralt, can you read this? Geralt moved to where Daniel indicated, studying symbols that mixed ancient inscriptions with Witcher code. Beware the flesh-eaters who wear faces. Silver ineffective. Fire recommended. Avoid capture, they steal knowledge through consumption. He paused, professional concern sharpening his features. That's a warning about something that hunts intelligently, consumes victims, and learns from what it kills. We have creatures like that on the continent. Dopplers who take human form, higher vampires who can pass for human. But this notation suggests something worse. The Goa'uld take hosts, Carter said quietly. Parasitic possession, stealing the host's knowledge and memories. Could that be what they encountered? Maybe, Geralt said, but his tone suggested uncertainty. Or maybe something else. The warning is specific, flesh-eaters who wear faces. Goa'uld are parasites, not consumers. This sounds like something that literally eats its victims, then assumes their identity. His medallion twitched more urgently. Something that learns by consumption. That's a high-level threat. The kind of contract that requires extensive preparation or gets Witchers killed. The replicators, Daniel said, recognition dawning. They consume technology, learn from what they assimilate, adapt to threats. But they don't wear faces. They're insectoid blocks or humanoid forms made of nanites. Whatever it was, the Witcher considered it dangerous enough to leave explicit warnings, Geralt said. That means we should expect similar threats if we follow their trail. O'Neill pulled out his radio, opening a channel to the SGC. Stargate Command, this is SG-1. Mission objective complete, hostile creatures neutralized, village secured. Requesting permission to investigate secondary objective. We've discovered evidence of a long-term extra-dimensional traveler who may have been operating in our galaxy for 3 centuries. Recommend gate travel to coordinates. Major Carter is transmitting now for follow-up investigation. General Hammond's voice crackled through the radio after a moment. SG-1, be advised we're detecting unusual energy readings from your current position. Is the dimensional anomaly stable? Carter checked her instruments. The wound is healing, sir. Corrupted entities eliminated. But the ancient technology at this site is still partially active. With your permission, I'd like to take readings of the dimensional interface before we leave. This could be valuable data for understanding how the ancients manipulated reality barriers. Permission granted, Major. But keep it brief. I want you back through the gate within the hour for debriefing, then you can mount a follow-up mission to those coordinates tomorrow after proper rest and preparation. Hammond's tone carried the weight of command experience that new exhausted teams made fatal mistakes. Colonel O'Neill, is Mr. Geralt requesting to accompany you on this follow-up mission? O'Neill looked at Geralt, one eyebrow raised in question. I follow the path, Geralt said simply. Another Witcher left these markers for someone like me to find. That's tradition, professional obligation, and possibly the key to understanding how the continent connects to your network. Yes, I'm requesting to continue. Understood, Hammond said through the radio. Mr. Geralt, be advised that any continued operations with SG-1 will require you to follow our protocols, accept Colonel O'Neill's command authority, and operate within Stargate Command's rules of engagement. We're not running a freelance monster hunting operation, we're defending Earth and our allies from galactic threats. If you can work within that framework, you're welcome to continue. If not... I understand chains of command, General, Geralt interrupted. I've worked with military officers, noble courts, and merchant guilds across the continent. I follow orders when they make tactical sense, offer expertise when it's relevant, and don't take contracts I can't complete professionally. That work for you? A sound that might have been amusement came through the radio. That'll do, Mr. Geralt. Colonel O'Neill will brief you on specific protocols. Welcome to SG-1's extended roster. Try not to get my people killed with your medieval combat techniques. No promises, Geralt said dryly. Monsters don't care about modern tactics. Carter had finished her readings, her equipment showing patterns of dimensional energy that would require weeks of analysis to fully understand. The ancient interface pulsed with residual power, and the pool at the ruin center reflected starlight with less distortion than before, reality reasserting itself after the corruption had been purged. As they prepared to leave, Geralt carved one final marker into the stone beside the ancient Witcher's trail signs. The wolf's head of Kaer Morhen, the date notation that Witchers used, and a simple phrase in Elder speech that Daniel's translator rendered as, "The path continues. The hunt goes on." They walked back through the forest toward the Stargate, and this time the silence felt less oppressive. The dimensional wound was healing. The corrupted kikimoras were dead. The juvenile survivor would live or die by natural selection, and the village would rebuild without fear of night-hunting demons. But ahead, through a gate address carved 3 centuries ago by a Witcher who'd walked between stars, more monsters waited. More contracts. More evidence of someone who'd taken the path to its ultimate conclusion, hunting threats across an entire galaxy, leaving markers for those who would follow, fighting darkness in places where humans had never been meant to walk. Question, O'Neill said as they approached the Stargate's platform. If we find this other Witcher, what then? You two have some kind of secret handshake. Professional courtesy rules. Do Witchers form guilds? Witchers are solitary by necessity and training, Geralt said. But we respect each other's contracts, share information about threats, and occasionally work together when a contract requires multiple hunters. If we find another Witcher from the School of the Wolf, he paused, considering. I'd buy them a drink, share what I know about the continent's current state, and ask what they've learned about hunting monsters between dimensions. Then we'd probably go our separate ways. It's how the path works. Efficient, Teal'c observed. The Jaffa Rebellion operates on similar principles, independent cells sharing intelligence, coordinating when necessary, but maintaining operational autonomy to prevent single-point failures. Exactly, Geralt agreed. Witchers learned centuries ago that central authority creates targets. We operate independently, trust our training, and rely on the markers left by those who came before. Carter dialed the gate back to Earth, chevrons locking in sequence until the event horizon exploded outward in its familiar cascade. The SGC's iris code transmitted properly, and O'Neill's radio confirmed clearance for return. As they prepared to step through, Daniel voiced the question they were all thinking, what if the Witcher we're tracking isn't still alive? 300 years is a long time, even with enhanced lifespan. What if we're following a ghost trail? Then we learn from what they left behind, Geralt said, his hand resting on his sword hilts. The path doesn't end with death. Knowledge passes forward through markers and warnings, through the signs we leave for those who come after. If the Witcher who carved these coordinates died 3 centuries ago fighting something in your galaxy, his expression hardened. Then I want to know what killed them. Because if it's still out there, it needs hunting. They stepped through the Stargate, reality compressing and expanding in the familiar sensation of gate travel. When they emerged in the SGC's gate room, armed guards stood ready, Dr. Fraser waited with medical scanners, and General Hammond observed from the control room with the expression of a commander who just added a medieval monster hunter to his operational roster and wasn't entirely sure whether that was genius or insanity. Geralt cleaned black ichor from his boots, checked his silver sword for damage, and calculated how many potions he'd need to brew before the next mission. Somewhere in the galaxy, a trail waited, 3 centuries old but still relevant, still dangerous, still calling to anyone trained to hunt monsters. The path stretched forward through stars and dimensions, connecting past and present through professional obligation that transcended time and space. And Geralt of Rivia, the White Wolf of Kaer Morhen, prepared to follow it wherever it led. The briefing room felt smaller at 0600 hours, cramped with too many people who'd had too little sleep. Geralt sat with his armor removed, revealing the scars that covered his arms and torso, a lifetime of contracts written in pale lines across enhanced flesh. Dar. Fraser had insisted on examining the healing progression from yesterday's fight, and her professional fascination with Witcher metabolism was evident in the way she documented every detail. The bruising from the kikimora impact is already 70% resolved, she reported to Hammond, who stood at the room's head reviewing mission parameters. Normal human tissue would still show significant contusion. His cellular repair mechanisms are operating at approximately 10 times baseline human rates, and that's without the healing potion he consumed. With it, she gestured at readings that defied conventional medical understanding. He's recovering from what should have been week-long injuries in under 12 hours. Swallow, Geralt said, accepting his armor back from the medical technician who'd been studying its construction. Accelerates Witcher healing through alchemical compounds. Toxic to normal humans, but our mutations metabolize the ingredients into enhanced cellular regeneration. Useful for staying alive when contracts get complicated. Hammond studied Geralt with the assessment of a commander evaluating an asset's capabilities and limitations. Mr. Geralt, before we authorize your continued participation with SG-1, I need to understand your tactical doctrine. You're a professional who works independently, operates on contracts, and uses methods our teams aren't trained to support. How do you see yourself fitting into a military unit structure? Geralt pulled his armor on with practiced efficiency, buckling straps while he considered his answer. I've worked with military units before, General. Temerian cavalry during the Nilfgaard invasion, Redanian special forces hunting insurgent mages, even Skellige raiders when sea monsters threatened their shipping lanes. Military structure and Witcher methodology aren't incompatible, they're complementary. Your people provide firepower, tactical coordination, and modern weapons. I provide expertise about threats that don't respond to conventional tactics. Expertise we don't have, O'Neill added, entering with coffee and the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who'd grabbed 3 hours of sleep. Sir, I've reviewed the mission recordings. When those kikimoras attacked, Geralt identified threats, called tactical responses, and engaged targets with a level of professional competence that kept my team alive. He didn't freelance, didn't ignore commands, didn't play hero. He fought like someone who understands team dynamics because his life depends on it. That's Witcher training, Geralt explained. We hunt alone usually, but contracts occasionally require multiple Witchers. When that happens, we establish clear hierarchy, define roles, execute coordinated tactics. Pride gets you killed. Ego gets your partner killed. You trust your team's competence, cover their weaknesses, and complete the contract. He met Hammond's gaze steadily. I can follow O'Neill's command on missions. I'll offer expertise when relevant, take orders when appropriate, and only override if I see something he can't. That acceptable? Hammond's expression suggested cautious approval. Colonel O'Neill retains tactical command. You operate as specialist consultant with combat authority. If the colonel says jump, you ask how high on the way up. If you see a threat he doesn't, you warn him immediately and recommend response. We clear. Clear, Geralt confirmed. Carter had spread star charts across the briefing table, the coordinates from the ancient ruins highlighted in red. The address leads to P7J 989, a planet in the Kal'am sector. We've had minimal contact. One MALP survey 18 months ago showed pre-industrial civilization, no gold presence, no significant Naquata deposits. The planet was classified as low priority for colonization assessment. Why would a Witcher target a low-priority world? Daniel asked, pulling up the original MALP footage. The images showed stone villages, agricultural settlements, forests that looked Earth-normal except for the wrong color sky. No obvious threats, no advanced technology, nothing that would attract System Lord attention. Monsters don't need advanced technology, Geralt said, studying the images with professional interest. They need prey, territory, and conditions that support their biology. A pre-industrial world with scattered settlements, dense forests, and minimal organized defense? That's perfect habitat for dozens of predator species. Witcher work isn't about fighting armies, it's about tracking things that hunt humans and killing them before they depopulate entire regions. Teal'c had been reviewing the mission parameters with warriors' attention to detail. The coordinates were left 3 centuries ago. Whatever threat existed then may no longer be present. Or it may have evolved, Geralt countered. Monsters adapt. Populations grow or decline based on available prey. 300 years is enough time for significant ecological changes, new predator species establishing territory, invasive creatures spreading through gate travel, supernatural threats awakening from hibernation. He traced patterns on the star chart. But the Witcher left coordinates for a reason. Either they needed backup, or they wanted someone to continue the work they started. Or they're dead and this is a warning, O'Neill said bluntly. Which is why we're going in prepared for everything. Standard loadout, P90S, sidearms, grenades, C4, medical supplies, and whatever medieval monster hunting supplies Geralt needs. Geralt had already assembled his equipment, both swords cleaned and sharpened, signs practiced until the patterns flowed reflexively, potions brewed from the limited ingredients the SGC's botanical department could provide. I've adapted 3 potions to alien plant compounds. Swallow for healing, Cat for night vision enhancement, and Thunderbolt for combat reflexes. They're not perfect, missing key ingredients from the continent, but they'll work well enough. I also need silver dust and blessed oil if you have anything comparable. We have colloidal silver and various petroleum-based lubricants, Carter offered. Not sure about blessed, though. Would consecrated water from the base chaplain work? Maybe, Geralt said, surprising himself with the consideration. Blessing rituals focus intent, and intent matters when dealing with supernatural threats. If your chaplain can consecrate oil with genuine conviction, it might produce similar effects to what priests on the continent achieve. Worth trying. Hammond made a note. I'll have the chaplain prepare whatever Mr. Geralt needs. Anything else? Information about what lives on P7J 989, Geralt said. Local fauna, apex predators, reports of unusual attacks or disappearances. The MALP survey was basic reconnaissance. I need ecological data. What hunts there? What do the locals fear? Are there regions they avoid, times they stay indoors, cultural taboos about certain locations? Daniel was already pulling up anthropological notes from the MALP's limited contact. The initial survey team spoke briefly with locals who mentioned shadow walkers in the deep forest. They wouldn't elaborate, cultural prohibition against discussing them directly. That kind of enforced silence usually indicates either religious significance or genuine fear. Shadow walkers, Geralt repeated, his professional interest sharpening. That's promising. Creatures that operate in darkness, avoid daylight, inspire enough fear that locals won't name them openly. Could be wraiths, specters, or something that exists partially between physical and ethereal states. I'll need silver weapons effective, signs prepared for intangible threats. Can you kill something that's not entirely physical? O'Neill asked. Yes, but it requires specific tactics. Burden. The trap sign forces ethereal entities into physical form temporarily. Silver disrupts their cohesion. Sustained attack during the manifestation window kills them permanently, or at least sends them back to whatever plane they originate from. Geralt's tone suggested this was routine work. I've hunted dozens of Wraith-class entities. They're dangerous but predictable once you understand their patterns. Fraser had concerns that went beyond tactical planning. If these shadow walkers are extra-dimensional entities like the corrupted kikimoras, exposure to them might affect the team psychologically. Dimensional bleed can cause hallucinations, paranoia, temporal disorientation. I want everyone carrying medical monitors that track neurological function. Good idea, Hammond approved. Major Carter, can we adapt the medical sensors for that purpose? Already designed the modifications, Carter said, displaying schematics on the briefing room screen. Neurological monitors, dimensional energy detectors, and enhanced life sign trackers. If anyone's brain chemistry starts showing exposure effects, we'll know immediately. The mission preparation continued for another hour, equipment checks, tactical scenarios, communication protocols, extraction plans if things went wrong. Geralt watched the meticulous planning with growing respect. These weren't soldiers playing at exploration. They were professionals who understood that thorough preparation meant survival. When the briefing concluded, Geralt found himself in the SGC's armory, watching Carter calibrate sensors while O'Neill test-fired his P90 at the range and Teal'c performed maintenance on his staff weapon with meditative precision. Daniel sat nearby, studying Geralt's swords with academic fascination. The silver blade, Daniel said, not quite touching the weapon but clearly wanting to. The metallurgy is remarkable. We've analyzed the composition. It's not pure silver, but an alloy with trace elements that don't match anything in Earth's geological database. How was this made? Witcher smiths, Geralt explained. They understand metallurgy that combines conventional forging with alchemical enhancement. The silver is mixed with meteorite iron, blessed during specific moon phases, quenched in oils prepared from monster parts. The result is a blade that holds an edge better than normal silver, maintains structural integrity under stress, and resonates with frequencies that disrupt magical cohesion. Magic as frequency disruption, Daniel mused. That's actually similar to how the ancients described their understanding of reality manipulation. They didn't call it magic, they called it quantum coherence management, but the principle is the same. Certain energy patterns disrupt the quantum states that maintain physical or extra-dimensional forms. Same thing, Geralt agreed. Different vocabulary. Witchers don't theorize, we apply. But the underlying principles probably match what your ancients discovered through technology. O'Neill had finished his weapons check and joined them, slinging his P90 over tactical vest. So we're going to a planet where things that live in shadows hunt humans, where a Witcher left coordinates 300 years ago, where the locals are too scared to talk about what's killing them. That about sum it up. Accurately, Geralt confirmed. Great, O'Neill said without enthusiasm. Just once I'd like a mission that's just explore the nice planet with the friendly aliens and the non-threatening local cuisine. But no, we get shadow walkers and dimensional horror. Why do I even hope anymore? Because hope is the first step toward disappointment. Geralt offered with the faintest hint of dry humor. O'Neill pointed at him. I like you, Witcher. You get it. You understand the fundamental rule of impossible situations, expect the worst, hope for survival, and keep your sense of humor because otherwise the universe wins. Witcher philosophy in 3 sentences, Geralt agreed. They assembled in the gate room 30 minutes later. SG-1 in full tactical gear, Geralt in his leather armor with both swords across his back and potions secured at his belt, equipment packs loaded with everything from C4 to consecrated silver oil. The Stargate activated with its familiar sequence of chevron locks, and the event horizon stabilized into the shimmering portal that connected worlds across impossible distances. General Hammond's voice came through the speakers. SG-1, you have a go. Exercise standard first contact protocols. If you encounter the entity that left those coordinates, we'll try not to stab first and ask questions later, O'Neill finished. No promises though. Some things need stabbing. Indeed, Teal'c added with perfectly timed gravitas. They stepped through the gate into unknown territory, following a trail 3 centuries old, hunting shadows that terrified an entire world. The path continued forward through stars and time. And somewhere in those shadows, monsters waited. P7J-989 greeted them with perpetual twilight. A planet whose axial tilt and orbital mechanics trapped it in eternal dusk, where the sun hung permanently at the horizon like a god's failure to commit to day or night. The forests surrounding the Stargate stretched in all directions, trees with bark like pale bone and leaves that whispered with sounds too close to human breath. Geralt's medallion vibrated the moment he stepped through, a warning that made his enhanced senses flare with predatory awareness. This place feels wrong, Carter said immediately, her instruments already showing readings that made her frown. The dimensional barriers here are thinner than on P4X639. Not critically unstable, but permeable. Like reality is more suggestion than certainty. Geralt knelt at the gate platform's edge, studying the ground with Witcher senses that cataloged details invisible to normal perception. Tracks, old but preserved in the perpetual twilight. Humanoid boots, Witcher style, the distinctive pattern of someone who'd walked carefully through hostile territory. And overlaying them, fresher disturbances, claw marks that were wrong, too many digits, spaced at angles that suggested the creature making them didn't follow standard bilateral symmetry. The Witcher was here, Geralt confirmed, tracing the boot prints with professional recognition. Moved cautiously, signs of combat, he pointed at disturbed soil, scorch marks that might have been igni burns. Engaged something, continued toward the forest. And recently, within the last week, something else used this platform. Something that doesn't walk properly. Define doesn't walk properly, O'Neill said, his P90 already tracking potential threat angles. Joint structure that shouldn't exist in bilateral organisms. Either this creature evolved in ways that defy biological convention, or, Geralt's expression darkened. It's something from between dimensions, wearing physical form like clothing it doesn't quite fit. Daniel had found the marker almost immediately. Carved into the gate platform's base where only someone looking for Witcher signs would notice. The wolf's head of Kaer Morhen, and beneath it, notation in the simplified code that translated as, shadow predators. Hunt in eternal twilight. Avoid direct engagement. Seek the villages, they remember. Avoid direct engagement, O'Neill read over Daniel's shoulder. That's not encouraging when it's coming from someone who hunts monsters professionally. It means the Witcher recognized these creatures as high threat, Geralt said, studying the notation with growing concern. Something dangerous enough that even with full preparation, direct combat was inadvisable. They prioritized information gathering over immediate action, that's unusual for Witcher work. We typically assess, prepare, then execute the contract. Delaying suggests the threat was beyond standard protocols. Teal'c had moved to the forest edge, his staff weapon tracking movement that might have been whined through pale leaves or might have been something else. There is activity in the trees. I cannot determine if it is natural or hostile. Geralt joined him, his enhanced vision parsing the twilight shadows with predatory focus. Movement, yes, but not wind. Patterns too deliberate, too coordinated, the kind of stalking behavior that came from intelligence and hunger combined. We're being watched. Multiple entities, maintaining distance, assessing whether we're prey or threat. They're in the canopy, moving between trees, staying in the deepest shadows where even my eyes struggle to distinguish form from darkness. Shadow walkers, Daniel said, consulting his tablet where the original MALP survey notes mentioned the local term. The villagers said they hunt anyone who enters the deep forest after dusk. But here, it's always dusk. Which means they hunt constantly, Geralt said. Apex predators in an environment that never forces them into daylight vulnerability. That's, he paused, professional assessment warring with recognition of just how dangerous this made them. That's perfect evolutionary conditions for shadow-based predators. They've adapted to perpetual twilight, optimized for hunting in conditions where prey species have permanent visibility disadvantage. Carter's sensors were going haywire. I'm detecting energy signatures that match what we saw with the corrupted kikimoras, dimensional bleed, reality distortion, but more stable. These creatures aren't corrupted. They're naturally occurring entities that exist partially in our dimension and partially somewhere else. So we can't kill them with bullets alone, O'Neill concluded. Probably not, Geralt agreed. We'll need silver, signs to force them into physical manifestation, and fire to prevent regeneration. Standard wraith hunting tactics, but complicated by their numbers and environmental advantage. They moved toward the village the Witcher's marker had referenced, following a path that wound through pale bark forest with Geralt on point and enhanced senses tracking the shadow walkers that paced them through the canopy. The creatures never approached within clear visual range, never committed to attack, just maintained predatory surveillance that suggested intelligence and patience. The village emerged from twilight like a scar on the forest. Wooden walls topped with torches that burned with greenish flame, watchtowers manned by guards holding spears wrapped in cloth that glowed with the same eerie luminescence. The gates opened at their approach, and the guards' relief was palpable despite their obvious terror at the strangers who'd emerged from the forbidden forest. The village elder, a man named Torin with eyes that had seen too many taken by shadow, met them in the central square. His gaze fixed on Geralt with immediate recognition, not of the individual, but of what he represented. "You're one of them," Torin said, his voice carrying the weight of desperate hope. "The hunters who walk between worlds. The one who came before, they said others might follow if the shadows grew too bold." "I'm following their trail," Geralt confirmed. "The Witcher who came here 3 centuries ago, what did they hunt? What did they learn?" Torin gestured for them to follow into a longhouse where other villagers had gathered, their faces showing the haunted wariness of people under siege. "They came through the ring of stars, as you did. Found our villages decimated, we'd lost hundreds to the shadow walkers over generations. They studied the creatures, learned their patterns, discovered the truth we'd feared but never proven." "What truth?" Daniel asked, his recorder capturing every word. "The shadow walkers are us," Torin said quietly. "Or were. Centuries ago, before the endless twilight, this world had normal day-night cycles. Our ancestors lived in balance with the forest. Then something changed, the planet's orbit shifted, or the sun changed, our elders debate the cause. Day and night became twilight eternal. And those who were caught in the deep forest when the change happened," his voice broke. "They didn't die. They transformed. Became things that hunt in shadows, that feed on those who still remember daylight." Geralt's expression showed he'd suspected something similar. Dimensional transformation. "Your ancestors were caught between states when the planetary conditions shifted, and they became transitional entities, partially human, partially shadow, existing in the spaces between physical reality and whatever dimension shadows touch. The hunter who came before understood this," Torin continued. "They tried to help, tried to find a way to reverse the transformation or at least stop the shadow walkers from hunting. They carved protective wards around our villages," he pointed at the glowing cloth on the spears, the greenish torches. "Taught us how to prepare oils that burn with light the shadows cannot cross. It bought us survival, but not safety. The shadow walkers still hunt. Still take 1 or 2 each month. And their numbers grow. Because they're creating more of themselves, Carter said, horrified realization dawning. Anyone taken by the shadows doesn't die, they transform. Join the population of shadow walkers. It's exponential growth. Did the Witcher find a way to stop the transformation? Geralt asked, his tactical mind already calculating impossible odds. Did they leave instructions, warnings, anything beyond the protective wards? Torin moved to a locked chest at the longhouse's rear, opened it with reverent care, and withdrew items that made Geralt's medallion vibrate with recognition. A Witcher's silver sword, blade etched with runes that matched the style of Kaer Morhen. A journal written in cipher that only someone trained in Witcher code could read. And a medallion, wolf's head, identical to Geralt's own, that still held faint traces of the magic that had activated it. They left these, Torin said, offering them to Geralt. Said that if another hunter came, they would understand. They tried to reach the source. The place where the transformation began, where shadow touches our world most deeply. They never returned. We found the sword and journal near the deep forest's edge, abandoned. The medallion was delivered to us by something that might have been the hunter themselves, transformed into shadow, barely holding enough humanity to complete one final act. Geralt took the items with the reverence they deserved. A Witcher's sword and medallion were sacred to the schools, symbols of oaths taken and contracts accepted. That another wolf had fallen here, transformed by the very thing they tried to hunt, was a tragedy that resonated beyond professional courtesy. He opened the journal, reading cipher that told the story of deteriorating hope. The entries began 300 years ago, methodical observations about shadow walker behavior, experimental tactics, attempts to force the creatures into physical form long enough to kill them permanently. But as the entries progressed, the handwriting became less steady, the observations more desperate, until the final entry. The shadows are inside me now. I feel myself fading, transforming, losing what made me human. I must reach the source before I'm gone completely. The dimensional anchor that holds this world in twilight. If I can destroy it, perhaps the natural cycles will return. Perhaps the shadow walkers will revert, or at least stop multiplying. If another wolf finds this journal, the anchor is at the forest's heart, where shadow is absolute. Bring silver. Bring fire. Bring enough explosives to break reality itself. And if you see something that looks like me but isn't, kill it quickly. Don't let me hunt the villages I tried to save. Letho of the Viper School. Geralt stared at the name, recognition and grief warring in his expression. Letho. I knew him. Before I was born, but, the schools keep records. Letho was one of the Vipers, before their school fell. He was looking for purpose after his home was destroyed. Found it hunting monsters through your Stargate network. And died trying to save a world that wasn't his, O'Neill said quietly. There was respect in his tone, soldier recognizing soldier, someone who understood duty beyond borders. Or didn't die, Geralt corrected, gesturing at the journal's final entry. Transformed. Became one of the things he was hunting. And in his last moment of clarity, he left instructions for someone to finish the work. He looked at O'Neill. I have to go to the dimensional anchor. Have to try what Letho couldn't complete. That's Witcher obligation. That's the path. Then SG-1 goes with you, O'Neill said, no hesitation. Because we don't leave people to fight impossible odds alone. That's military obligation. That's what we do. Teal'c gripped his staff weapon. We have faced gods and monsters. We will face shadows. Carter was already calculating payloads. If we need to destroy a dimensional anchor, we'll need more than conventional explosives. I'm thinking Nequata-enhanced charges, enough energy output to disrupt quantum coherence across a wide area. Daniel was still translating the journal, his expression growing darker with each entry. Geralt, there's more. Letho describes the Shadow Walker's transformation process. Once you're taken into deep shadow, the change happens gradually. Hours, maybe a full day before you're completely converted. If we can reach someone in the early stages, there might be a way to reverse it using ancient technology, force their quantum state back to baseline human. That's theoretical, Carter cautioned. Everything about this mission is theoretical, O'Neill countered. We're hunting shadows with a witcher using a 300-year-old dead man's notes. Theoretical is our baseline today. Geralt strapped Letho's silver sword across his back alongside his own. 2 blades, 2 schools, 2 witchers separated by centuries but united in purpose. The medallion he hung around his neck beside his own, and it vibrated in harmony with his, both responding to the dimensional wrongness that saturated this world. The deep forest, he said, studying the maps Torin provided, crude but accurate representations of the region where shadow became absolute. That's where Letho fell. That's where the dimensional anchor exists. That's where we end this. Or where we join him, O'Neill said pragmatically. But at least we'll go down fighting. They prepared through what passed for night on P7J 989, a deepening of twilight into near-absolute darkness where the Shadow Walkers would have every advantage. Geralt brewed potions from his limited supplies, mixed blessed oil for their blades and bullets, carved earthen symbols on stones they could throw to create trap circles. Carter prepared the Naquata charges with yields calibrated to destroy dimensional anchors without collapsing the planet's entire reality structure. Daniel studied Letho's journal for any advantage, any insight into how to fight creatures that existed between states. And in the deep forest, shadows gathered with predatory patience, waiting for prey foolish enough to enter their domain. Waiting for another witcher to join the hunt that never ended. The deep forest swallowed light like a living thing, not absence of illumination but active consumption, shadows so profound that even Geralt's enhanced vision struggled to parse form from void. They moved in tight formation, each team member's position marked by luminescent tape Carter had engineered to emit frequencies the Shadow Walkers found uncomfortable. Not enough to repel them, but enough to create boundary markers in the consuming darkness. Geralt led with both silver swords drawn now. His own in his right hand, Letho's blade in his left, dual-wielding in a style that was impractical for most but necessary when fighting enemies that attacked from multiple dimensions simultaneously. His medallions vibrated so violently they hummed against his chest, and the dimensional bleed here was thick enough to taste, copper and ozone and something that reminded him of the moment between waking and dreaming. Contacts, Teal'c said quietly, his staff weapon tracking movement that existed more as sensation than sight. Multiple entities, surrounding our position in 3-dimensional patterns. 4-dimensional, Carter corrected, her sensors showing readings that defied conventional physics. They're using shadow as a 4th spatial dimension, moving through darkness the way we move through air. They can appear anywhere shadow exists, which in this environment is everywhere. The first attack came from directly beneath them, shadow rising through the ground like water through sand, coalescing into forms that were humanoid but wrong. Too many joints, limbs that bent in directions anatomy didn't allow, faces that shifted between human features and abstract patterns that hurt to perceive. The Shadow Walker that had once been someone's ancestor reached for Daniel with hands that trailed darkness. Geralt's earthen sign flared purple beneath their feet, the magical trap forcing the Shadow Walkers into physical manifestation. They shrieked, sounds that existed across frequency ranges human ears weren't meant to process, and became solid enough for violence to matter. O'Neill's P-90 barked controlled bursts, silver-coated rounds that Carter had prepared punching through shadow flesh and forcing the creatures to disperse rather than die. They're not staying corporeal long enough to kill, O'Neill shouted over the weapon's fire. We need more than bullets. Geralt was already moving, both silver blades singing as they cut through shadow forms that the earthen trap held in semi-physical states. Steel would have passed through harmlessly, but the silver resonated at frequencies that disrupted the dimensional cohesion holding the creatures between states. Where his swords cut, Shadow Walkers came apart, not dying, but fragmenting into component shadows that scattered into the consuming darkness. Fire! Geralt called back, his left hand tracing Igni's pattern while his right sword deflected a strike that would have taken his head. Flame burst from his palm, caught a cluster of shadow walkers attempting to flank Carter's position, and the creature's shrieks intensified as heat forced them into states where they couldn't maintain their transitional existence. They burned. Not with normal flame but with light that seemed to come from inside them, humanity asserting itself for one final moment before being consumed completely. But there were dozens more. Hundreds. The entire forest's worth of transformed villagers, accumulated over centuries of exponential growth, all converging on the team that dared invade their domain. We can't fight them all. Daniel had his sidearm out, firing with academic precision at targets that barely registered damage. There's too many. We don't fight them all, Geralt said, his tactical assessment cutting through panic. We reach the dimensional anchor. Force it into instability. That's the contract, complete the objective, not kill every hostile. He pointed deeper into the forest where his medallions vibrated with such intensity they drew blood where the chains pressed against his neck. The anchor is that way. Half a kilometer. We run. Run toward the source of the dimensional horror, O'Neill muttered, already moving because the Witcher was right, standing and fighting meant being overwhelmed. Why do I keep agreeing to these plans? They ran through shadow that clutched at their legs like physical substance, through a forest that had forgotten the concept of direction, pursued by entities that moved through darkness faster than humans could sprint through what passed for solid ground. Geralt threw prepared stones behind them, burdened symbols that activated on impact, creating trap circles that forced the pursuing shadow walkers into physical form long enough for the SG-1 team to gain distance. Carter triggered proximity mines as they passed, not to kill but to create light, brilliant magnesium flares that carved temporary safe zones in the all-consuming shadow. Each burst illuminated creatures that flinched away from illumination, their forms becoming less cohesive when forced into visibility. Teal'c's staff weapon discharged in measured intervals, one shot every 3 seconds, plasma bolts that burned through shadow and bought precious meters of advance. He moved with Jaffa precision, never wasting energy, never firing unless the shot would matter. The dimensional anchor revealed itself gradually, a structure that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space, all impossible angles and surfaces that were simultaneously convex and concave, built from stone that was shadow made solid. Ancient technology, corrupted or perhaps functioning exactly as designed, warping the fabric of spacetime around itself until the planet's natural rotation had locked into permanent twilight. And standing before the anchor, barely recognizable as humanoid, was what remained of Letho. The thing that had been a Witcher stood 3 meters tall now, its form a grotesque merger of human and shadow, still wearing the tattered remains of armor that the Viper School had issued centuries ago. Its face shifted between Letho's features and abstract patterns of darkness, and when it spoke, the voice carried harmonics that suggested dozens of shadow walkers speaking in unison through what had once been their leader. Another. Wolf, the Letho thing said, recognition and hunger warring in its tone. Come to, finish, what I began. Or to join, the hunt eternal. Geralt raised both silver swords, his stance defensive, watching for attack patterns. Letho of the Viper School. I'm Geralt of Rivia, School of the Wolf. I found your journal. Read your final entry. You wanted someone to destroy the anchor, I'm here to complete your contract. Contract. The word seemed to cause pain, humanity asserting itself briefly against the shadow that consumed it. Yes. The contract. Save the village. End the transformation. I tried. I failed. Became what I hunted. The Letho thing's form rippled, shadows coalescing and dispersing in patterns that suggested internal struggle. Can't hold on much longer. The shadow wants to hunt you. Wants to add you to us. But what's left of me remembers the path. O'Neill had his P-90 trained on the creature, but he didn't fire. Can we help him? Reverse the transformation like Daniel suggested? Too far gone, Geralt said, grief evident despite his Witcher's emotional control. The shadow has integrated with his essence completely. Reverting him would mean destroying what makes him exist now. It would be death, not rescue. He addressed the lethal thing directly. Brother Witcher. You want me to end this? The anchor and you both. Give you the death you earned. Please, the lethal thing said, and for a moment its voice was purely human, purely the man who'd walked the path for decades before transformation claimed him. Before I forget completely. Before I hunt the villages I tried to save. The anchor, it gestured with limbs that were too long, too wrong. Destroy it. The explosion will force dimensional barriers to reassert. The planet's rotation will resume. The shadow walkers will disperse or revert. I don't know which. But the transformation will end. Carter was already positioning the Naquata charges at the anchor's base, her hands steady despite the dimensional wrongness that made reality feel negotiable. Yield calculated for maximum disruption without planetary scale destruction. We'll have approximately 90 seconds after detonation to reach minimum safe distance. The dimensional feedback will be, she paused, searching for adequate description. Catastrophic in the immediate vicinity. We won't make it out, Daniel said quietly, looking at the distance they'd covered, the pursuing shadow walkers that still pressed from all directions. Not in 90 seconds through this forest. Teal'c checked his staff weapons charge. Then we hold position. Ensure the anchor's destruction even if extraction is impossible. No, Geralt said, a plan forming with the kind of desperate tactical clarity that came from a century of impossible contracts. I stay. Hold them off while you run. The lethal thing and I, we're both shadow-touched now, even if mine hasn't progressed. We can buy you the time you need. That's suicide, O'Neill said flatly. That's the contract, Geralt corrected. Letho started this hunt 300 years ago. I finish it. You get out, report to Hammond, make sure these people, he gestured at the direction of the village. Get the protection they need when their world starts rotating again. That's the mission objective. The lethal thing made a sound that might have been agreement or laughter. Smart, Wolf. Using the monster, to fight monsters. Very, Witcher thinking. Carter had finished setting the charges, the timer interface glowing with malevolent promise. Geralt, there has to be another way. We don't leave people behind. You're not leaving, Geralt said, already positioning himself between the team and the approaching shadow walkers. You're completing the mission while I complete the contract. Different obligations, same goal. He looked at O'Neill. Colonel. I'm giving you a tactical recommendation, extract your team while I provide cover. That's the play that gets the most people out alive. O'Neill's jaw tightened, military necessity warring with the code that said you never abandon teammates. But he'd made these calculations before, had sent good people to die so missions could succeed. He hated it. But he understood it. 30 seconds on the clock, he said finally, each word costing him. If you're not back at the gate in 30 seconds, we're dialing Earth and leaving you. That's the order. Understood, Geralt said, knowing they both recognized the lie. 30 seconds wasn't enough time to fight through the pursuing shadow walkers, reach the gate, and dial out. This was a one-way mission, and they all knew it. SG-1 ran, Carter triggering the detonation sequence as they moved, O'Neill and Teal'c laying suppressing fire that carved paths through shadow forms trying to intercept them. Daniel looked back once, memorizing the image of a Witcher standing alone against impossible odds, two silver swords raised in defiance of darkness itself. Then the forest swallowed them, and Geralt was alone with the lethal thing and hundreds of shadow walkers that pressed closer with predatory hunger. Just like old times, the lethal thing said, positioning itself beside Geralt in the defensive stance that Viper School had taught and centuries of transformation hadn't completely erased. Two Witchers, impossible contract, probably going to die. Probably, Geralt agreed, his medallions vibrating so violently they might crack. Around them, shadow walkers gathered in numbers that defied counting, their collective hunger a palpable force. But the contract gets completed. The anchor gets destroyed. The transformations end. That's what matters. The path, the lethal thing agreed, and for a moment, just one moment, it sounded entirely human. Tell me, Brother Wolf. Is Kaer Morhen still standing? Yes, Geralt said, offering the mercy of truth in final moments. The school of the wolf endures. Trains new witchers. Remembers the old ones. Good, Letho said, his voice clearer than it had been, humanity asserting itself one last time through force of will. Then let's give them a hunt worth remembering. The shadow walkers attacked in a wave that was more force of nature than tactical assault. Hundreds of transformed villagers, centuries of accumulated victims, all converging on the two witchers who stood between them and the escaping SG-1 team. Geralt's swords became silver arcs in darkness, each strike forcing shadow forms into dispersal. His signs flared in rapid succession, ard blasting clusters away, igni burning through masses of shadow flesh, burden creating zones where the creatures couldn't maintain dimensional fluidity. Potions burned through his system, thunderbolt accelerating his reflexes beyond human limits, cat turning absolute darkness into merely oppressive gloom. Beside him, the lethal thing fought with the skill that had made the Viper School legendary, using its shadow form as weapon and defense simultaneously. It could move through darkness the way the other shadow walkers did, appear behind attackers and tear them apart with claws that were shadow made solid, then disperse before retaliation could land. They held for 20 seconds. 30. The detonation timer counted down with mechanical indifference. 60 seconds, 45, 30. Geralt felt his mutations straining, toxicity from multiple potions approaching lethal thresholds, stamina depleting as signs burned through reserves faster than even Witcher physiology could regenerate. A shadow walker's claws raked across his ribs, pain exploding through enhanced nerves, black blood mixing with the monster's ichor. The lethal thing shrieked as concentrated attacks forced it into increasingly unstable states, its form fragmenting as the shadow that sustained it began failing. Go, it managed, voice breaking apart into harmonics. Get clear of the blast. You've bought them enough time. The contract is complete. Not without you, Geralt said, because witchers didn't abandon each other, didn't leave brothers to die alone even when death was inevitable. I'm already dead, Letho said with perfect clarity, humanity blazing through the shadow for one final moment. Have been for 300 years. This is just finishing what should have ended then. Go, Geralt of Rivia. Walk the path I can't walk anymore. Hunt the monsters I can't hunt. Remember that once. I was a witcher too. The timer hit 15 seconds. Geralt ran, not from cowardice but from tactical necessity, from the recognition that completing contracts sometimes meant surviving to accept the next one. Behind him, the lethal thing threw itself into the mass of shadow walkers with the berserker fury of someone who'd been trapped between life and death for centuries and finally saw release. 10 seconds. Geralt triggered every remaining earthen stone, creating a gauntlet of trap circles that forced pursuing shadow walkers into physical form long enough for him to gain distance. 5 seconds. The Naquata charges detonated. Reality screamed. The dimensional anchor didn't explode so much as cease to exist across all possible states simultaneously. The blast wave was pure unmaking, matter and energy and the fundamental quantum coherence that held dimensional barriers in place all failing at once. Shadow walkers caught in the expanding sphere of annihilation simply stopped existing, their transitional forms unable to maintain integrity when the rules that allowed them to exist rewrote themselves. Geralt felt the wave catch him. Not physical force but dimensional translation, reality grabbing him and hurling him forward through space that briefly forgot how physics worked. He hit something that might have been a tree or might have been the ground or might have been a direction that didn't have a name, and consciousness became optional. When awareness returned, he was lying in twilight that was genuine twilight, the kind that came before dawn, not the eternal half-state this world had been trapped in. The sun was rising for what must have been the first time in centuries, genuine daylight spreading across a forest that suddenly looked less oppressive and more merely dangerous. His medallions had stopped vibrating. The dimensional bleed had collapsed, barriers reasserting themselves, and P7J-989 was returning to normal spacetime. Geralt forced himself upright, inventory checking through pure instinct. Both swords still sheathed, armor torn but functional, ribs definitely cracked, toxicity levels dropping as his mutations processed the potion overload. Alive, against tactical probability. The crater where the dimensional anchor had been was vast, scorched earth extending 100 meters in all directions. No shadow walkers. No lethal thing. Just char and broken stone and the fading traces of dimensional energy dissipating into morning light. He made it back to the Stargate on willpower and Witcher stubbornness, found SG-1 waiting with weapons raised and relief evident when he stumbled through the tree line. They'd made it out with seconds to spare, dialed Earth, then refused to leave until they confirmed Geralt's status. "Thought you were dead," O'Neill said, lowering his P90 with the careful control of someone processing too many emotions. "So did I," Geralt admitted. "But the contract's complete. The anchor is destroyed. The dimensional barriers are restored. The Shadow Walkers," he paused, looking back at the forest where morning light was burning away centuries of accumulated darkness. "They're gone. Dispersed when the transformation that created them became impossible to maintain." "And Letho?" Daniel asked quietly. "Found the death he earned," Geralt said. "Died a Witcher, fighting monsters, completing a contract 300 years in the making." He touched the second medallion still hanging around his neck. "I'll take this back to Kaer Morhen. Let them know one of the Vipers walked the path to its end with honor." They dialed Earth, stepped through the gate, and emerged in the SGC's gate room where medical teams and armed guards waited. General Hammond was there personally, his expression suggesting he'd been monitoring the mission with growing concern. "SG-1, Mr. Geralt," Hammond said as they descended the ramp. "Debriefing in 2 hours. Medical evaluation first. And," he looked at Geralt specifically. "Welcome back. Colonel O'Neill's preliminary report suggests you saved his team's lives while completing a 300-year-old contract. That's," he paused, choosing words carefully. "Exceptional work." "Just Witcher work," Geralt said, exhaustion finally catching up with enhanced metabolism. "Following the path. Completing contracts. Same as it's always been. But as Dar." Fraser led him toward the medical bay, as Carter promised to help analyze Letho's journal for insights into dimensional mechanics, as Daniel excitedly discussed publishing papers about Witcher methodology, and as O'Neill simply clapped him on the shoulder with soldier's respect. Geralt realized the path had led somewhere unexpected. Not just to another world, another hunt, another monster to kill. But to a team that fought with the same professional competence he'd spent a lifetime developing. To people who understood that sometimes the contract required sacrifice, but who refused to accept that sacrifice without exhausting every alternative first. To a galaxy full of monsters that needed hunting, and people who welcomed a Witcher's expertise instead of fearing his mutations. The dimensional wound at the ancient structure on P4X639 would eventually heal completely. The coordinates carved by Letho would lead to other worlds, other contracts, other trails left by a Witcher who'd walked between stars for centuries. There were Goa'uld parasites to study, replicator adaptations to counter, Ori crusades to resist. Threats that would benefit from someone who understood monsters. The path continued forward through possibilities that spanned galaxies. And Geralt of Rivia, the White Wolf of Kaer Morhen, had found that some hunts were worth more than coin. Some contracts defended more than villages. And some monsters wore the faces of false gods who needed a Witcher's silver to remind them of mortality. In the months that followed, Geralt became an irregular but invaluable asset to Stargate Command. He consulted on xenobiological threats, helped develop silver-based countermeasures to gold symbiotes, and occasionally accompanied SG teams when contracts called for expertise that military training couldn't provide. The dimensional intersection on P4X-639 became a study site where Carter and Daniel worked to understand how the continent connected to the Stargate network, a bridge between realities that ancient experiments had created and Witcher necessity had finally revealed. Letho's medallion found its place in Kaer Morhen's Hall of Remembrance, his journal translated and distributed among the remaining Witcher schools as evidence that the path extended farther than any had imagined. The villages on P7J-989 rebuilt under natural day-night cycles, their children growing up in a world where shadows were merely absence of light, not transformative horror. And somewhere in the Stargate network, among thousands of worlds and infinite contracts waiting to be accepted, the white wolf hunted monsters that existed in the spaces between science and magic, between human and alien, between what should be possible and what actually was. The path stretched forward through stars and dimensions, connecting ancient obligations to future necessities. Because some monsters wore crowns and claimed divinity. Some wore faces stolen from victims they'd consumed. And some, the worst kind, wore the illusion of inevitability, the belief that darkness was eternal and unchangeable. Those monsters needed to learn what Witchers had always known. Nothing hunts forever. Everything dies eventually. And when the contract calls, a Witcher answers. Whether the hunt spans villages or galaxies, whether the monster claims godhood or dimensional transcendence, whether the fee is coin or simply the satisfaction of leaving the world slightly less monstrous than when you found it. Indeed. More stories await. Indeed. More stories await.